This is the Literary License Podcast with your hosts, Nez, Vicky Ray, and Keith Chorgo, discussing Edgar Allan Poe from book to screen and everything in between. Coming at you from the UK and USA.
The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal, the redness and the horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest ban, which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men. And the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour.
I want to help save your soul so you can join me in the glories of hell.
No, never.
You look around this world and believe in the goodness of a God who rules it. Famine, pestilence, war, disease, and death. They rule this world.
There is also love and life and hope.
Very little hope, I assure you. No. If a God of love and life ever did exist, he is long since dead. Someone, something rules in his place.
Hello, welcome to Literary License Podcast, and welcome to Season 3.
Yay! Yahoo! The pigeons loose.
And as you know, our Season 3, we have changed the way that we've done a bit of production. Our first episodes of each month will be book to screen, and we are highlighting Edgar Allan Poe. And this will be our first Edgar Allan Poe episode, which will be Masque of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe and Hop Frog by Edgar Allan Poe as well. But before we get started, let's find out who's with us. First, we have Rod Laby. Hello, Rod.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, I'm groovy.
We're great. It's always
too,
groovy.
And you too. Yeah, it's groovy, all right.
We're both groovy.
Unfortunately, Nez, our new co-host that will be doing our Dark Shadows with us, is not able to make it today due to work commitments, but she will be here next month. So
we
before
won't insult her behind her back like we do John, so...
We will insult her once she's been here for 3 or 4 episodes, and then she'll be free. So before we get started, let's find what everyone's been up to. So, Rod, what have you been up to since last time we spoke to you?
Well, I've been doing 2 big articles. I can't call them major articles, but I will say that they're huge. One of them has to do with Dark Shadows, one of our favorite topics, cool. And it's an interview with actor Roger Davis. And Roger, to me, as someone who used to watch Dark Shadows when I was a kid, he was a major player on the television show. But over the years, because he had several characters under his belt, actually, I think 4 or 5, I can't even remember. But the first one I remember is Peter Bradford, who played a part in 1795. Remember that? That's the one that I remember the most. Then he was also in the Dark Shadows film as Jeff Clark, the hero of the movie. So I'm doing an interview with him. I'm just putting the finishing touches on it today even. Then I have another one that's for a magazine called Retro Fan. That other one is for Scary Monsters magazine. But this is Retro Fan is a magazine that deals with, I guess you could call it baby boomers. But it's not just baby boomers, but it's not far from being baby boomer, if that makes sense. I don't know if it gets into Generation X or whenever that generation came around. But this is an interview with a singing group, a family band actually, called the Cowsills.
Oh yeah,
and
Family Girls.
Yeah, they were the basis or the inspiration for the Partridge Family, where the mom joins a rock group. And in fact, they were approached to do this, but the father wanted their real mother to play the part of the mom, and ABC said, no, this is a Shirley Jones vehicle. She's playing the mother, so everything just fell apart. But it was based on them, and now they had 7 kids, and 3 of them have passed away, and 3 of them are performing together as the Cowsills. They're doing a lot of nostalgia tours with people from Three Dog Night and stuff like that. And I got their documentary called Family Band. I watched it. It was fascinating. I got a hold of them, and I interviewed all of them on the telephone. It's 10,000 words.
Oh, my God.
That's a lot. That's a big article. And I've only polished up 6 pages of it, but I think it's something like 30-something pages. And they said they wanted to print it all, so that's what I'm going to do. That won't be out until 2020, which sounds like it's in the future. Well, it is in the future, but the science fiction future, and I guess it's not really, but so that's what I've been up to.
Cool.
Besides reading Masque of the Red Death and Hop Frog.
Which we've all had to do.
I like the Cowsills. Cowsills did a song from Hair. Didn't they do the song Hair from Hair?
Yes, that was their biggest hit. That was their biggest hit, and they were not a group to be considered the kind of group that would do a song like Hair, which was like anti-war and the hippie generation and everything. That was their last big hit. That went to number 2.
And then they had one about the park and the.
Yeah, they did. You're very good, Keith. Yeah, it's called The Park, the Rain, the Park, and Other Things. That was their first big hit.
Don't get he's gonna start singing.
Yeah,
no.
I know that song. I know them because I'm a huge Partridge Family fan, and so when I found out that Cowsills is like I bought Cowsills' greatest hits, so I have that.
Oh yeah, and then they did Indian Lake. That was another biggie for them. But The Rain, the Park, and Other Things, which is known as the Flower Girl song, that was their first hit, and that went to number 2. But within a year and a half, their career was in the crapper, basically, for want of a better term.
To make me happy.
Yeah, that's it.
Brilliant. So, Vicky, what have you been up to?
Not as much as you guys have been, clearly. No, I finished up The Dark Crystal. I binged watched the first season on Netflix, and I totally loved it. I thought it was fantastic. And I mean, if you didn't watch the show, I mean, we watched it, we were probably teenagers when it came out in high school, and I loved Fizzgig back then, and I love Fizzgig even more now.
Well, I remember when I saw Dark Shadows, the original film, I was in school.
Dark Crystal.
Yeah, Dark Crystal, sorry. And because the Skeeches go,
Yeah, I know, the Skeksis. I love Chamberlain to Skeksy. I just trying to figure out whose voice. I was going through trying to figure out whose voices were whose.
Simon Pegg's one of them.
Yeah, and my Sigourney Weaver's one of them, and I couldn't figure out who she was. I have to go through it again. I meant to go through that this morning, but it is so worth the binge watch, everybody. It's fantastic.
Well, when we saw the movie originally, a bunch of us were, friends from school, and then we went to French class like the following Monday, and every time our French teacher said something, we all go,
I know.
We do that in every class to the point where we were on detention for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Other than that, we're just getting ready. We have state championships here in Texas all weekend. It's going to be 104. So
Oh my!
I know it's going to be so freaking hot down here. It's already hot.
Is it humid heat? Is it humid?
It's between. It's not a dry heat, but anybody tells you come to Dallas because it's a dry heat, they are fucking liars. That's the only word I have to say for that. Lie. All lies.
So, Vicky, are you staying moist?
I'm very moist. I'm always moist.
Oh God.
Moist.
So you escaped Hurricane Dorian then? You escaped Hurricane Dorian.
Oh God, Dorian's on the other side. I mean, I just like our heart really all funny side. Our heart bleeds for the Bahamas and anybody else that.
I know, horrible.
I thought Dorian disappeared though. Is it gone now?
It's gone up to it's hitting Cape Hatteras as a category 1 or 2 right now.
See what you should have done is give Dorian some secrets about the Clintons and would have disappeared.
That's true. It's true. Everything else disappears. Oh my God.
Oh, we better not got the
Checks
politics.
their closets at night just in case the Clintons are in there.
The Clintons are hiding.
I know the Clintons. Hillary controls Bill.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Bill never had any pants.
He never did. Poor guy. So what are you up to, Keith?
Yeah.
Well, personally, I got Isaac. Isaac and I came to the end of a lot of our series. So I got Isaac started watching what's it called? Breaking Bad. There we go. Sorry, brain
Oh
died.
no,
Yeah,
he's not going to be one of those.
And we started watching it. And I have to say, this is my second time through it. I'm really, really enjoying it. And I'm
It's
also
great.
watching a Canadian series that is hilarious called Working Moms. And I highly
heard that
suggest it. It is bloody brilliant.
It looks good. I haven't seen it yet.
And the Spanish series Elite season 2 just started, so we'll probably start watching that as well. But besides
Are
that,
you still working on our Spanish?
no. I still need to, but one day I'll get to it once I put my brain to rest. But yeah, and besides that, just working 9 to 5, and I become a country and western song without any of the dire divorces or anything. So yeah.
No.
So, but anyway, I guess that brings us to Masque of the Red Death with Edgar Allan Poe. Now, Masque of the Red Death was originally published as Masque of the Red Death, a fantasy, in the 1942 short story by American author Edgar Allan Poe. What's quite interesting about Masque of the Red Death, it was one of the biggest sellers actually for the time, and it's known as one of the best Edgar Allan Poe short stories, which we'll discuss whether we find this one of his best or not. It was published in Graham's magazine and since been adapted to many different forms. There's plenty of songs written about it. And what's very interesting, our closing theme is an Italian song called El Florete, and it's about the Masque of the Red Death. And he attributed the Masque of the Red Death to the AIDS epidemic, which is quite interesting.
I found it interesting that the Red Death is fictitious. When I first saw this, and I haven't read this since high school because a lot of Poe was required reading back then, it's Red Death is totally fictitious. It's not the Black Death. It's not this. It's not that. And he talks about how you have sharp pain, sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores, which most females would call menstruation. I'm not sure if he was talking to women back in the day, but that's what I would call it.
Well, as I learned from South Park, I never trust something that bleeds for 7 days and doesn't die.
But they said that the disease was probably inspired by tuberculosis, or I guess they used to call it consumption back in the day. Yeah. And apparently Poe's wife, her name was Virginia, she suffered from the disease when he was writing this story. And like the character Prospero, he tried to ignore the fatalities of the disease and just kind of try to dismiss it. I guess you're in denial when you see people you love dying, basically. And I guess his mother and his brother and other people that he loved had tuberculosis. Poe really did not have a happy life. No wonder all of his stuff was so dark and dismal. But I thought it was kind of sad. And they were talking about, they said a writer described something about the Masque of the Red Death is describing a bile hemorrhage, fever, or necrotizing, I can't even say this, fasciitis. And they suggested that the Red Death was not a disease or a sickness, but it was a weakness, sort of like original sin that is shared by all of us heathens and humankind. They like to have to get that one little glimpse of Christianity in there, I guess, even in a dark story of Poe. But that's my take.
Vicky, do they name the prince in the story?
For the Masque of the Red Death, I thought they named him Prospero.
He's Prospero
Sure
because he's Prospero.
I know Prospero was the Vincent Price character, but I wonder if I just read this book. The story just 3 days ago.
Prospero. He's the wealthy young man. He's got the distinguished rich family born into it.
And he's very charismatic. He's very charismatic, and everyone loved him. And he liked a good joke, apparently.
Well, and everybody liked him because he's funny
story.
too. So, they might have been fair weather friends, depending on how you wanted to take it. But it does seem like an allegory to me. Like, I don't know if anybody had to read Plato's Republic, but there was the allegory of the cave, and it's just sort of the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, as long I wasn't sure if they had named him in the story.
Yeah, they
but
do.
I do like. Okay, they do. All right, I do like that name. Prospero sounds like prosperous in a way.
I know it's got two different. It could be taken a couple different ways, I guess. I mean, Prospero, he's a rich little, shit that's got everything he wants and can avoid things and lock the world out while there's so much suffering and whatnot, like a lot of people do when you have death and pestilence and awful things. A lot of people do not want to get involved. I know we have situations here in the United States that people don't want nothing to do with. They ain't going to touch that. So, sure. I mean, it could be kind of the same thing. He walled himself in. I was thinking, was the castle that self-sustaining that they were going to outlast a plague? I mean, what did they just ship in everything that wasn't touced by, anybody who was, moist with infection, Keith?
Well, the thing is, can this travel? I mean, it can travel in the air, can it?
I don't know I think it was by being touched, I think, if I remember correctly.
Oh, okay.
And so he didn't want anybody, you know how he was standing, I don't know, I believe, it was in the book too. They were standing up on top of the ramparts of the castle, and they weren't going to let people in. And he thought he was doing them a favor by killing whoever was begging to come in.
Yeah, that's not in the story.
No, it's not. Okay.
I was waiting for that part.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I watched the movie first, and then I read the story. I should never do it that way because I always get things crossed.
Right. Now, I haven't watched the movie in a while, but I've seen it so many times in the past.
Right.
I went to I saw it at the movies when I was a kid. So.
Oh gosh.
They used to have. They'd release these movies, these AIP Poe pictures on a single bill, or if they did a double bill, it would be the second movie would not be anything that had to do with a Poe movie.
Right.
Usually a teenager, the Ghost of Dragstrip Hollow or something like that. But somewhere toward the middle 60s, like around 67, 68, they started repackaging them into like triple horror shows. So there'd be 3 Edgar Allan Poe, and we'd go see them. I remember going to see them, and I began to notice similarities. First of all, that all the candles were red. There was never a candle that was not red in any of these movies. They always drank out of the same glassware, which is in every movie, the same glassware, and it always ended with, except for Masque of the Red Death and Tomb of Ligeia, I believe, or I think it actually did happen in Tomb of Ligeia. It ends with an inferno, a cleansing, so to speak, by fire.
I didn't notice when I was watching the movie, and then I read about it. Well, when I was going through this stuff, I mean, not that we should be talking about the movie, but I was like, boy, they got really, really fancy for this low budget film. But then it said that they used most of the old stuff left over from Beckett with Peter O'Toole.
Yeah.
And and it was just like, oh, wow. It's like, no wonder it's such fantastic, props and whatnot, but
wasn't Prospero another character in The Tempest? William Shakespeare's The Tempest as well. That's what Prospero was as well.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Right. You might be right.
Shakespeare, oh God, slogging through that is difficult.
Yeah, I know. I used to have to get I hate to say we're giving away my old, he likes to tell me I'm 90. But we used to have LPs back then. They're called albums. They're big discs, kids. And you put them on things and it spin. And I would listen to all of the Shakespeare stuff I had to do for class or whatnot, because that was the only way I could understand it if it was read to me while I read the book at the same time.
Right.
Because it was so freaking hard to get through.
It was very hard. I mean, I'd read the first page, and when I got to the bottom, I go, what did I just read? I really didn't know what I had said. You know, I couldn't see people performing this stuff because it just, especially when it was supposed to be a comedy, I just couldn't see it. I didn't find the humor in it. But I have seen it performed on film, and people, you know, it's done. It depends on the actors, I guess,
right?
And the screenplay. But I thought Poe was bad enough, but Shakespeare really did me in. And of course, we had to read Hamlet and all that stuff. So it was like, oh God,
Henry. Yeah, I mean,
Henry the Fifth.
Yeah, I loved that one though. Actually, I liked it when Mel Gibson did that. He made a movie out of that. I just loved it.
Oh, that's right, he did. You know, I forgot all about that.
Yeah, he did a good job, and I loved his performance in that. Even though
it had Glenn Close was in it, wasn't she? Well, there was who's that great British actor? Oh, what is his name?
Kenneth Branagh.
Who?
Kenneth Branagh.
Yes. He's done quite a few Shakespearean things.
Yeah, and that other one as well. Derek Jacobi does a lot of them as well.
Yeah, well, he did I, Claudius. I remember seeing that. That's the first place I ever saw him in.
I love the PBS version of I, Claudius. I love
it. Yes. I thought he was excellent in that. He was excellent in that.
I mean, I have to.
But what I could I add something about the story?
Yeah.
I would. I don't want to compare it to the movie because I assume we will be talking about that. But I didn't get the impression in the story, at least, that Prospero was necessarily an evil person. There was no mention of devil worshipping or selling your soul to devil. There was a big use of the different rooms that were different colors, which I find fascinating in the film. But they caught it perfectly, by the way, in the movie, and in the story. I'm sure all those colors represented something significant. I don't quite know what, outside of them being bright. And then when you get to the last one, that's black, everything draped in black with red-tinted windows, it's almost like these are the different stages of life. And at the end, you find this, which is the Black Death, or the Red Death, or whatever.
In some of the notes, it said that the multiple single-tone rooms might be representative of the human mind, showing different personality types with imagery and of blood and time throughout. Also indicates our corporal bodies. So yeah, it represented something. I guess it just depends on how you took it when you read it.
Right.
I mean, I guess the thing to remember in the short story as far as Prince Prospero is concerned, I mean, he wasn't an evil man. He was happy and dauntless and sagacious kind of a man. He was everyone loved being in his company. But, you know, saying that, you know, he did take 1,000 of his closest friends and walled them up for how many days? Can't remember exactly how many days, to hide themselves from the plague while everyone outside the prison walls are dying. So,
right.
You know, so you kind of have this juxtaposition of this one character who's like the life of the party and fun to be around and everyone loves him. But at the same time, you know, he has closed his doors and letting the rest of the country beyond the walls are dying left, right, and center from the plague or from, the Red Death plague from the story. So it does kind of like, so what I found quite interesting is that you start out with the story, it's like Prospero is like, okay, he's a, you know, nice person, but then you find out what actually is going on behind the wall, outside the walls, and you realize that he's not the kind and happy, fun-loving person we think he is. He seems to be He seems to be more self-centered and all about his own perseverance without actually helping others. And you think maybe he's having a party, not because he likes these people he's having a party with, but just because that way, when he doesn't want to be the lone survivor.
Yes, it takes his mind off it on top of that.
Yeah.
And they never say that the masked figure was really, said he was the Red Death. He could have been another party goer for all you know. But the red was so emphasized by the masked figure. And it was kind of funny because nobody stopped him in the book as he walked in, whatever this thing was supposed to represent. As he came through parted the way like the Red Sea. No one wanted to touch him, and he went through all the different colors of the rooms till he got where he needed to be.
I mean, what I also quite like about the story as well, that you have the different color rooms, but then you have the black room with the red stained glass. And what I quite like about this is that there's a large ebony clock in this black room.
Yes, I forgot about that.
Every hour, everyone would stop their partying, the orchestra would stop, and they would wait a minute while the clock chimed. And once the clock chimed, then they would start over again and start back up. And I quite like that, because you can understand, like, everyone just standing there, so stopping and just letting the chime go, and then on with the party until you get the chiming at midnight. And then all of a sudden, if you remember, like, whenever you hear a bell go off at midnight, whether it's Big Ben or New Year's Eve, everyone stops at midnight, and then like those gongs take forever. And that's when the Red Death takes hold of everyone, and then of course everyone starts falling dead after that. But it's just like that weird pause that it's like the longest pause of the whole evening, and then all of a sudden then this happens. And I thought,
he did, when he had the masquerade, he did ask everybody not to wear red, though. That was another thing. He did not want to see that.
Well, I guess if he's gonna have his guests wearing red, that would remind him of what's going on behind the walls. And I guess you could take this about these kind of people who are living their lives and not aware of what's going on beyond their own lives.
Right.
And that's what most of us do. We go on about our business, and we don't really care. We don't care that there's floods going on in a country, there's starvation or whatever is going on in the world, because we're safe behind our little walls. It's only when it integrates into our world that all of a sudden we're aware, and all of a sudden that we care because it's happening to us. But when it's not happening to us, we don't care. And if you notice that nowadays, with most people don't want to watch the news.
It's depressing.
Well, it's depressing.
The fake news.
Any of it anymore.
But even before fake news coined, and we just had regular news. Think of Vietnam. You had the Vietnam War going on.
Walter Cronkite.
Well, but if you remember back in the 60s, if you look at what people are doing, if you realize what the music was doing at that time, the music that was, it was all like happy-go-lucky, less fun music. It's the Monkees, it's the Brady Bunches on TV. People are watching Bewitched, they're watching Green Acres,
until the Vietnam War.
Well, that was all. These were the big shows during the Vietnam War, because people didn't want the Vietnam War in their homes.
Well, I was talking about the music changed. It became a little more retaliatory, anti-war, anti-government.
Well, that was the fringe stuff. That was the people who were really into music. But if you look at what was charting, the actual stuff that was charting, the actual charting stuff was bubblegum music, the Archies, Sugar.
Right. I still like that. Oh my God, I'm gonna have to listen to that later. That's gonna be stuck in my head now. I hate it when that happens.
What about Dizzy by Tommy Rowe? I'm so dizzy. That's one from that era.
Yeah.
And that's when the Cowsills were big, during that era.
I'm going to have to look those guys up, because I don't remember them. I know their music, but I can't remember them. So I'm going to have to look it up.
But even though, if you look at the disease and the Red Plague and stuff like this, and if you compare it to diseases that do go on around us, whether it's the AIDS crisis.
AIDS was a biggie that I remember, because I was young enough and old enough at the same time to comprehend what was going on.
Well, what about Ebola?
Ebola.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that one.
But it never reached our shores. That's the reason why. But we heard about it. We were scared about it, but we didn't want to know about it. Now, if something happens and it did appear on our shores, chances are we probably would act like Prospero and just hide ourselves away.
Oh, people freaked out. We had 1 or 2 cases here in Dallas a couple years back, and people were going nuts. They were like stocking up. They were figuring Dallas was going to be ground zero. Yeah. So,
and that's what's
was that from Africa?
I'm trying to remember. Somebody came into the hospital, and he was from Liberia, and he was infected. The man died. He was just horribly ill. And one of the nurses contracted Ebola from him. And it was just, everybody was freaked out. It was such a shit show, because they were worried about who was on the plane with this guy. And everybody everybody was just freaking out. I mean, people, seriously, it's like, I understand it's really scary. I don't know. I think a lot of times people hype it up more on the news to take our mind off what's really going on in the world. Yet another way to get people out of paying attention. So, but nobody likes any kind of, no one wants to see people, I don't personally then, I should say, like to watch people suffer and die of something horrible. I mean, I watched a movie yesterday that we're going to discuss next week. And I went to tell Keith, I texted him, you didn't tell me to bring a box of Kleenexes while I'm watching this movie,
What is it?
That's next week.
Long time.
What's the movie?
Long Time Companion. I was just
Long Time
bawling.
Companion, okay.
I was bawling.
This is our month of diseases, so.
Yeah, it is. This is our month of happiness and sunshine and roses. And I didn't pick any of the sad stuff. He did. It's all him.
But,
I definitely want to be involved in The Nanny when The Nanny is shown.
Oh, that's season.
I love those hag films or whatever they call them. Horror hag.
Horror hag.
Well,
Horror hag.
Then you're gonna love the Vicky Ray story that will be on TV soon.
Fuck you.
I like how these big stars from the 40s all of a sudden were wielding meat cleavers and axes and knives in the 60s.
Yeah.
Like Tallulah Bankhead and Die Die My Darling, or Fanatic. That's the UK name. Olivia de Havilland. Joan Crawford was probably the queen of it, though, with Straight Jacket, which I just watched the other day.
William
They're
Castle.
so bad, they're good. They're so bad, they're good. It's just
Exactly.
yeah, and they gave it their all. I mean, it was like she was in Mildred Pierce or something, except she was an axe murderess.
I love every one of them.
Now, I wanted to mention when you were talking about the story, okay, I think that because I just read this the other day, and if my memory serves me, I do think that either when Prospero dies or when he corners the guy in the wearing the costume, that he pulls the mask away and there's nothing there.
Right.
The robe is filled with nothing. So you actually do see or not see what's inside there. The fact that nobody's wearing the robe means that the Red Death held dominion over all, which is how it ends, I believe, with that line. And the Red Death held dominion over it all. Because the clock, which plays absolutely no part, except very minor in the movie, and the candelabras that were on either side of the door to the Black Room, it says that they slowly went out. The clock stopped because obviously you needed to wind it, I guess. And then everything was gone. They were all dead, all of them.
Well, I think it's meant to remind us that the Grim Reaper is going to come for all of us eventually. I mean, it's just one appointment they say we're all going to keep. And I think that was the whole point to the time, the clock, and the man in the red.
Death doesn't have a face, says it, because the death is. I guess if death did have a face, it'd probably be a mirror, wouldn't it?
Right.
Well, that's what the movie is like, that, isn't it?
Yeah, it does that sort of thing. I mean, I thought what else is quite interesting about the short story is that when Prospero basically asks, he goes, "Stop that person is wearing red," and the thing is, no one stops them because everyone's like,
no,
in fear. This vision, this red shrouded person, this blood splattered robe and this funeral,
right?
Basically, everyone's just like in fear of him. And I like the fact that the figure goes into the Black Room. Prospero shows up in the Black Room. He pulls out his dagger to kill him. And then, of course, Prosperous dies of the Black Plague. And when he screams out, then all the revelers go into the Black Room. And as they're entering the Black Room, they're all dying. And I thought that's quite a strong image if you think about it. I mean, you're reading this back when it first came out. That must have been quite a horrifying image because...
Especially then.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like just a picture, like all these people running into this room and just dying. All thousands of people. So just bodies piling on top of bodies on top of bodies. I guess it's like zombie infliction almost without them coming back to life. But I have to say about to begin the Poe, I think this was probably, I love reading this story. I thought it was a great little short story.
I just love Poe. He's always, I mean, he's so dark and dismal, I know, but I mean, I just love his stuff. I've always loved Poe.
I don't know how he came up with some of these ideas, like the Cask of Amontillado, for example. walling somebody up that would never be found again. And the case of M. Valdemar, where he keeps a dead man mesmerized until he's between life and death, or he is dead. I think he is dead, but he can still talk, right?
Yeah,
Right.
He's stuck in his.
And then he gets released from the spell by the mesmerizer, and he just rots away within the course of seconds until it's liquid. That's the gross part about it. Liquid putrescence, it said so the smell must have been horrific. I can only imagine. Oh my God.
Reminds me of Stephen King's Thinner for some reason.
Turned to human soup.
Yeah.
I mean, normally in the podcast, we're going to basically just do one story, but in this case, we're going to be doing a second story called Hot Frog, because Hot Frog plays an important part in the film that we'll be discussing later on. Now, Hot Frog is an interesting short story. It's also written by Edgar Allan Poe, and it was published in 1849. The title character is a person with dwarfism taking from his homeland because the gesture of a king particularly fond of his practical jokes. It takes revenge on the king and his cabinet for the king's striking his friend, a fellow dwarf, Trippetta. Now, what's quite interesting is that about Hot Frog is that Poe found himself in a bit of a scandal. And basically what happened is that a fellow poet named Osgood was writing love poems to Poe, and Poe would write love poems back, though they did have a platonic relationship. But what basically was happening is that another person basically wanted the affection of Poe. Now, Poe's still married at this time. And her name was Elizabeth F. Elliot, who became extremely jealous of the situation and started spreading rumors that Poe was having an affair while his wife was dying with Osgood, who was married to Poe's best friend. And though it was a platonic, it started off this whole thing to the point where the newspapers in New York City, literary scandals and gossip columns were printing this stuff, trying to ruin Poe's name. Now, Elizabeth Elliot, when you do read more about her, she was scorned by Poe because Poe didn't really have any feelings or didn't even like her as a friend. So she started this whole scandal. So it became like a dangerous liaison situation for this. And when Poe's wife died, she said the cause of her death was Elizabeth Elliot. Elizabeth Elliot pushed her through, forced her to die. And that's what made him write Hot Frog, which is quite interesting. So as we get into discussing Hot Frog, it's quite interesting when you have that in the back of your mind that this is the reason why he wrote the story.
Well, they're called, it's his revenge tales. That's why he started writing these things, because he's pissed.
Well, it's quite interesting because the simple fact about Hot Frog basically is a revenge tale, but it is also about, a group of individuals who are high up in a literary circle causing problems for somebody when they don't need to cause problems for somebody. They should.
It sounds like Facebook.
Oh, God.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's quite interesting. I mean, with the first two Poe stories that we're now covering is that you can see that they're still quite relevant. I think that's the reason why Poe has lived a lot further than a lot of his contemporaries have. I mean, you look at these best-selling authors at this time, Osgood was one of them that we just mentioned. Eliot was another one who was way ahead of her time, though she lost all due respect. But Poe is the one that everyone's going to remember.
Right.
So maybe because his stuff does resonance today. So, Rod, what were your feelings of Hot Frog?
Well, I had read the story before. I went through a spate of reading Poe that was sometimes in the 70s, and I read practically everything that he's wrote, and a lot of it isn't even horror-oriented at all, like The Pit and the Pendulum. I mean, not The Pit and the Pendulum. Murders on the Rue Morgue. Okay, Murders at or on, I don't even know what it is, but that is a detective story. He is the father of the detective story I read because of how they figured out how the ape could get in and out of the apartment. But that had some horrific elements in it as well, decapitations and stuff like that. But in Hot Frog, I thought it was a perfect companion to Masque of the Red Death because what happens is, the high point of Hot Frog is that when the king or the prince, I don't remember who it was, I think it was the king, because he had Hot Frog as a jester. Yeah. And when he was approached by the little girl, or in the movie it was a little girl.
A well-proportioned dwarf. She was a well-proportioned dwarf.
There's
In the movie, though,
little person. I'm offended.
little person. It's very strange because in the movie it's a real little girl, but they dub her with an adult woman's voice, which sounds very odd. I don't know why they did that, but they did have a human girl. I mean, a human. I mean,
that was so noticeable in the movie. Did you not think?
Right.
The voiceover.
Of course, she was human. So anyway, the motifs fit. And so they can stand separate, but they can also be melded together because they both take place at a huge party. But what happens is Hop Frog gets revenge on the king and all his courtesans who laughed at what he did to his friend, and he came up with the idea for the ultimate joke to play on everybody at this masquerade party, and it was to get them to be dressed up like monkeys. And apparently they'd never seen a real monkey, so they didn't know what it was, but he did. He had some knowledge of it, and he created outfits for them and covered them in tar and other flammable, conveniently flammable materials.
These guys, you know.
Yeah, and then he got them to come in, and he pretended like he was the animal trainer. He had a whip and all that stuff like that. And then he ended up tying them up to a chandelier and setting them on fire, and they just burnt to death in front of everybody until it was nothing but a big mess on the floor. And and then he leaves with the little girl. He escapes with the dancer, the tiny dancer. That's probably where tiny dancer came from, that terminology, from that
Tiny dancer?
show. Tiny dancer.
Of that when I was watching the movie. It's like tiny dancer.
Yeah, because that's what she is. She's a tiny dancer, and she's perfectly proportioned as a little girl would be. So I found it. What I found most disconcerting about the story was that after the prince or the king had thrown a glass of wine in the girl's face, they heard a sound that they didn't quite know what it was, and it seemed to be coming from everywhere, and it was Hop Frog gritting his teeth together.
Right.
And the king said, "Where's that sound coming from?" And they said, "It's outside, sire," or "It's this place, sire." And he goes, "I think it came from this area where Hop Frog is standing." He goes, "No, my liege, it wasn't me." And later on, they hear it again. They hear it again right after they've been burnt. And he said, "I'm Hop Frog, and this is my final jest." And then he left. So it leaves you with a feeling of, was he justified in making these people die that way? And it was certainly a horrific way to die, just for merely throwing a glass of wine in this little girl's face? Or is this just the culmination of a lifelong of abuse that this prince or king, again, I can't remember if he was a king, has thrown upon, the people that he thinks are inferior to him? Like he thought Hop Frog was inferior. He was merely somebody there to make him laugh. He didn't know that this was a grown man with thoughts and feelings and opinions and the ability to carry out a rather involved murder, which is what he did for everyone. And the beauty of it is that they all laughed at it at first, and they do that in the movie too. Yeah. They laugh at it, and then when they realize, it's just one man in the movie, if I remember rightly, and then they had this woman come up to in the movie. She screams the worst scream I've ever heard a woman scream in a movie.
I don't know what it was with her. That was an awful actress. God love her.
It was. I mean, it sounded like, I can't even describe what it sounded like. It made Grayson Hall from Dark Shadows, her screams, which I thought were the worst. This one is 10 times worse, and she screams more than once. That's what gets me. It's like, couldn't you find somebody who could scream good or dub it in or something? But I really enjoyed the story. It was a neat revenge tale, and I must admit that there was a certain part of me that admired him for coming up with such an intricate way of getting revenge, which is what like you said, Vicki, it's a revenge tale. It's all about revenge, and it's like Carrie at the prom. Okay, you could look at it from one way and say, "Oh, that's horrible. Everybody's dying in this prom." Then you could say, "Go, Carrie, go."
Okay. I actually rewatched that a couple of days ago, about a week or two back. I was like, "Oh, well, hell, I haven't seen this one in a while." And having refreshed myself on Carrie, I was just like, well, I never noticed that before. I love it when I just notice things for the first time.
Oh, yeah, I'm like that. It's very 70s, very 70s.
Oh, my God, it doesn't get much more 70s than that.
The afro hair on all the guys. I remember that stuff.
Yeah. My brothers had that curly hair shit going on.
They had to use a pick to comb it. Oh my God,
Everybody had
that's
a
so
pick
funny.
in their back pocket. No one had a comb.
They did.
Yeah.
I mean, what I quite like about Hot Frog is I like a lot of shadowing and a lot of nuances that go on there, because you start out with this, this jester, he's the joke, he's the partier, he's the one that's going to make them laugh. This is what his job is. And though this looks like, I also like what Poe said, that this job as a jester, a lot of kingdoms are stopped using the jester, but this king is still using the jester because he needs someone for the butt of his jokes.
But he would force him to drink, and he would have horrible reactions to alcohol. Poe was had a problem with alcohol too, so.
But the thing about the king, the reason why he was doing this, because he loved to laugh, but he loved to laugh by the misfortune of each other. And so you're kind of reading this, and I thought, oh my God, well, okay, here we go. But then when you find out about the story about Trippetta and Hot Frog himself, that they basically you don't find out what his real name is. They call him Hot Frog because he's so ugly.
Yeah.
And basically, it's a cruel name. It's not a nice name. It's a really cruel name. And that they stole them from a kingdom that they conquered. And this is the prize that they brought back for the king.
Yeah.
These two people who are human as prizes.
But they're toys.
Right.
Here's your toys. And then what I also like about what Poe did with the story as well is that you get the jester, and normally the jester or the comedian is not the person who's too bright. They're not the brightest, they're not the brightest bulb in the pack normally. They're normally funny, ha ha ha, and you always think they're thicker than a 2x4. But in this, the jester is actually the smartest of them all, because he comes up with this plan, and he fully is able to articulate and manipulate all these people who are supposed to be brighter and smarter and the people who are better than everyone else into this game where he is able to get his revenge and then run away with Trippetta. I mean, we don't know what happens after they run away, because I don't know where these two people are going to hide, because they're going to be pretty easy to find. Right. But, they do have a chance of freedom, which I thought was quite clever, because I think in any lesser hands, Poe would have, someone else outside of Poe would have wrote this kind of story and not have this ingenious way of like removing this plot and having this back. I mean, the story is what, about 5 pages long? 6?
Right.
Yeah, it's short.
About a 10-minute read.
But you have like this fully fledged story with these fully fledged characters going on within these pages. And I mean, I've read books where basically they have had 400 pages and they weren't able to fully fledged characters like this. And I have to sit there, and what I also found interesting about Hot Frog as well, that it's almost written in modern English. It was kind of weird, because you're so used to Poe, when we do cover him all, he does have his own way of writing. And it does, it's a very, he is the godfather or the king of Gothic. And the reason why Gothic novels from Poe onwards are written in a certain way is because he developed this way of talking, which tends to be a bit long-winded sometimes. And you have to read between the lines of what you're going.
Yes.
It doesn't do that. Hot Frogs is in your face. This is directly to the point, and it's just like reading a modern, it's like reading a modern short story. And I would sit there and say, anyone who is going to get into Poe, Hot Frog would probably be the one you want to start out with before you go into your stuff. Like The Pit and the Pendulum or The House of Usher are a bit more long-winded as far as.
Well, Pit and the Pendulum is nothing like the movie. I mean, if these people are reading these stories because they saw the movies, which is what I did, I realized, like Premature Burial is another one. There's a line that they use in the movie, and that's it. The movie was completely created just from that line.
When we get into the film sides of the reason why I was watching this interview with Roger Corman, and what they would do is, because they were short stories, the last third of the film would be the short story, the 2/3 would be stuff that they would make up to make a
longer movie,
movie sort of thing.
I wanted to ask you, you said he was the godfather of the Gothic novel. When did the Bronte sisters write their books?
Brontes were
around the 1840s, 1850s.
Yeah.
I'll also look that up.
But they were more romances, right? Essentially, but they were also Gothic.
Wuthering Heights, Jane Eyre. I mean, but it was still Gothic, I want to say, though.
But I think they weren't Gothic horror; they were Gothic romances because there's never any really horror. I mean, if you look at Wuthering Heights, okay, they got Kathy, and she's
a little bit of a ghost story.
And you have a slight ghost story sort of thing where she's haunted by Heathcliff a little bit, which basically is kind of a ripoff of, which I think was turned into a ripoff for Gone with the Wind because that kind of had the kind of same kind of thing, really. But then,
well, he's the one who gets haunted by her. It's not the other way around. She dies, and she haunts him, and they go out into the snow upon the crag of whatever, and the doctor says that he saw Heathcliff walking with a woman.
And the Moors.
Oh, that's the movie. There you go. That's in the movie version. I'm talking about the Laurence Olivier movie.
Takes her to the window, and Merle Oberon dies, and she's holding her at
that's
the
a really good movie.
And I think it's funny when Carol Burnett does it, when Harvey Korman takes Carol Burnett to the window and watches her drops her at the window. I gotta look for that now that I think about it. The Bronte sisters were like 1820s. They were born in 1770, so around 1842 to 1844, 1847. Jane Eyre.
But their Gothics normally was mainly a woman coming to a big house. And then
they weren't published under their names, were they? I mean, wasn't that in the day that women couldn't write books?
I think they were published under them. Now I'm going to go back and look, dadgummit.
I do think they were done under a man's name, because there was also a third sister, Anne Bronte, and I forget what she wrote. But she wrote something famous as well. But the other two, Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, are almost like connected. Not just by the sisters.
They wrote their stories at their own expense, and they wrote a volume of poetry under the first use of their pseudonyms, Kerr for Charlotte, Emily, and Acton. But they all went on to publish novels with differing levels of success, but they didn't use a man's name from what I'm seeing here. And this is a UK site, so it can't be wrong.
Okay.
Keith.
They didn't have much success in their lifetime either. These people, these poor artists.
It wasn't until later.
Well, they were miserable.
I think she died of consumption. I think one of them died of that.
Yes.
And one of the sisters, when she died, the other sister was there. And when she died, she saw her soul, the other sister's soul leave her body.
Oh, my. That's kind of weird.
As a vapor. Or it could just been the heat in a really cold room.
Yeah, it must have been very moist. It was very moist that day.
Very moist.
It was a moist, cold day. We're not going to stop with this for a while. I can see it. The moist shit going to show up.
Moist. That's such a word. Moist. Descriptive.
It used to represent Duncan Hines, for Christ's sake, okay?
Oh, yeah. Moist cake, yes. That still is, isn't it? Oh, they don't advertise cakes on TV anymore.
Cake is not moist anymore in public TV, you know?
It's dry as a bone.
But I think what puts that Poe aside from everyone else is that I think that he wrote, I don't think he ever wrote a full-fledged novel, did he? It's all short stories and poetry that he wrote and essays. But I think that he wrote, his is basically Gothic horror. I think the Brontes are kind of Gothic romanticism. Rebecca is Gothic romanticism, which is written 100 years later. But I guess then I think
he took like a little hint from Lord Byron, maybe a little bit, you know?
Well, even Dracula is, I guess Frankenstein is probably the only really big horror Gothic novel, really, if you want to go into horror.
Right.
Frankenstein's
Dracula isn't?
Victorian horror.
Oh, Victorian, okay.
But it does have but it is written very much
Sexually repressed Victorian.
Yeah.
It's 1897, so that was later in the cycle, definitely, right?
Yeah, but we did have Lord Byron, and he was writing Gothic horror at the time as well, and Percy Shelley outside of his poetry, he wrote, because all of them gathered for when they wrote Frankenstein, they're all gathered in this really horrible rainy summer. And they decided to have a contest because they're so bored.
Who's going to write what? Yeah.
Yeah, that's all. Who could write the scariest? And they all wrote something scary. But
isn't it a legend that she wrote that in a night?
Well,
one night.
I don't think she wrote that in one night. It's too fucking long to be written in one night. You write that longhand. It's before typewriters.
Oh, that's right. It was longhand in those days, wasn't it? Yeah.
Oh my God! No kidding.
Quill pen.
Yeah, with a feather quill pen. Well, they do that at the beginning of Bride of Frankenstein. Don't they have a little scene like that with Lord Byron and Mary and Percy Bysshe Shelley during a thunderstorm?
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you remember that scene?
And then in the 80s, they made a couple movies about the making of this. Ken Russell did a film called Gothic, which was about the writing of Frankenstein. And then America did a film called Haunted Summer with Eric Stoltz, which was basically the same story as Gothic.
Right.
Huh, I didn't know that.
And it's quite interesting. It's about this haunted night that they all decide to write a short story, and they're haunted by what they're writing. So
I did want to add this about Poe overall, right, when you said he only wrote short stories, and why he might be considered macabre or whatever you want to call it. He brings you into the world of somebody who is either already mentally ill when the story starts, or they soon descend into mental illness, such as the Black Cat, for example, where the man just suddenly has this obsession with this black cat, and the cat loves him, but he finds these constant, rubbing up against him and wanting to get on his lap, annoying, and then he tries to kill the cat. I think he tries to hang it. He does really horrible things to the cat.
Poe was predisposed to death. I mean, he was so afraid of being buried alive, which was the norm.
Oh, yeah. Well, a cask of Amontillado.
In case ring the bell, whatever, if he's stuck in there, so someone know he was alive and in the
Oh, that was in the Ray Milland premature burial. I know all these things.
And Telltale Heart as well. That's another one that with Poe, you tend to come into the middle of a story. You don't get like the beginning and the end. You kind of come into the middle of it, and it's like, here we go. But
there's no slow burn.
But he catches you up very quickly. For someone who's able to write a story in such short time, if you look at most people who write short stories, I would sit there and say that Poe's probably got the most memorable catalog of short stories.
Yes. And usually his protagonists are either crazy or they're evil. Right. Or they want revenge, like Hop Frog, and the same guy in Cask of Amontillado wanted revenge. And what's the one about the heart in isn't that funny?
The Telltale Heart. The
Telltale Heart. Okay. This was just some nutty guy who had an obsession with this old man that he lived with about his eyeball. Believe it or not, I don't know if you remember that. But he wanted to kill him because he kept looking at him with this screwed up eyeball that this guy had. And he went into his bedroom at night and opened up a lantern until just a little beam of light landed on the eye. And when it opened, he jumped on him and killed him and cut him up. I mean, that's really horrible. And then buried the heart under and by then he was completely nuts. You could hear the heartbeat and all that stuff.
But then again, every time I see someone who's got a lazy eye with one eye looking at you and the other eye looking for you.
Don't get me going.
I do get that feeling that I want to kill them. Oh my God. Or especially
you got to wonder, are they looking at you or the wall? I mean.
I just try to stand like right in the dead center, so that way I know that at some point I'm in vision. So.
Right. That's just a weak muscle in the eye. They can take care of that now, I think.
Yeah.
They pull it over and make it centered or whatever.
So, Vicky, is there anything you want to add about Hop Frog before we move on to the film?
No, I just I like how he has the characters. It's really quick. It's not a slow burn story, and it gets right down to the business of things, which is revenge and killing people in a horribly terrible way.
I agree. That's a very apt description of the story, and it's kind of thrilling because the way that they're killed is very unusual. It's not like they got an arrow in the chest or anything like that. They were dressed like monkeys, and they burnt in a group.
Sure that they had tar and shit on their skin. He was not.
Yes. Right. And they're hanging from a chandelier on top of that.
Nobody could help them. They were just totally screwed.
So, Vicky, what are your final thoughts on the short story Masque of the Red Death and Hop Frog?
Well, I can't say too many things bad about Poe. The one thing I liked about his stories, well, you already brought it up, is like there's really not a slow burn to any of his stories. Like you said, it gets right down to the meat of the story, and then he actually catches you up with a beginning that should have been there anyway. But they're really, I guess they're not really easy to read. They're quick reads, but you got to pay attention to them a little more because they are not old English, but I want to say the 1840s to the Victorian kind of way people spoke. They didn't have our Spanglish, and I guess they spoke the Queen's English. I guess that's what I want to say. But no, I love Edgar Allan Poe. They're all that. Everybody should read them, whether it's required reading or not. It's good stuff.
And what about yourself, Rod? What are your final thoughts on the short stories, Masque of the Red Death and Hop Frog?
Well, Masque of the Red Death as a short story is something that I've returned to over the years. A lot of Poe I've returned to over the years. I also find his poetry very melodic, and of course it's not free verse where everything doesn't rhyme, so it's even harder to come up with words that rhyme, and he does a beautiful job of it.
It's not even iambic pentameter or something like that you...
You're right. I mean, now it's much easier to write free verse or open verse or whatever they call it, because it doesn't, remember when we were in school and we had to write an iambic pentameter poem, and that was hard to do, because it's not just having the last words that rhyme, you have to have the cadence that goes right with it. So I think Poe does that, and his short stories have been always, I tend to gravitate toward things that have been made into films. I hate to say that I'm a child of the cinema, because that sounds so, it's like saying, I watched that on TV, I know everything about it. I mean, there are some good things to cull from those experiences, and the biggest surprise for me was to find out that A, the stories were not the same, or B, they left out so much detail from the movie that this is really fascinating, especially House of Usher. But it has this poem put in the middle of it called The Haunted Palace, which they made into a separate movie, and it's an allegory for somebody going insane, which they completely lost in the movie. I don't know if you've ever seen Haunted Palace with Vincent Price, but they passed it off as a... You've never seen that?
No, I don't think I probably have. I just don't remember it. Like I said, the one thing I do like about when we do these podcasts is things that I totally took for granted or never really liked or responded to when I was younger. And when you look at things with much older eyes, you go back and you revisit these things, and it just means that much more. It's like, wow, this is some pretty cool shit after all,
Yes.
That's how but if I've probably seen it and I just don't recall it, that's what it is.
Well, I think what they did with the movies is they went to the public domain, because of course they didn't have to pay any licensing fees to Poe, and they were able to do whatever they wanted with the stuff. And as long as they hooked it into this literary master, another shocking movie from Edgar Allan Poe. Most people didn't even know who the hell Poe was, but they still went because he sounded like he had a great name. Let's face it, he does. Edgar Allan Poe.
You know what? Now I think about it, I could have named one of my kids Edgar Allan Poe, just sort of like John Paul Jones. Those are cool names. Just like, and then just John Paul Jones, and then da-da-da-da-da. Do
you have a son named John Paul Jones?
No, I'm just kidding. I would never do that to my kids, but I wish I had.
Oh yeah, they're great names. I mean, it became the hook, especially combined with who's the other person, Vincent Price and Roger Corman. Those were the three ingredients that made those movies. I think there's still the three ingredients that have kept the interest going for Poe. So I enjoy all his short stories that I've read, but there's quite a few that I haven't read. I never read Ligeia, for example, even though I saw the movie, but I never read the short story.
Well, you soon will be reading it because it's coming up on season 3.
Oh, is it? Okay. Well, it's in my book, so I will give it a read, definitely a read. So yeah, when this little treasure is before everybody that they could find, they don't have to buy anything really. They could find it on the internet. Why not go for it? I mean, short stories, I love short stories because everything has to, you take a snippet of something and you have to really ratchet it up to the point where it's interesting to keep you going until the very end.
Well, on Amazon, it's a free download to Kindle, the complete works of Poe.
Well, there you go.
So
I don't think he had any.
So,
what?
I said, any of our listeners out there, if you want to get involved in the Edgar Allan Poe, if you have a Kindle, it's free download for all his stories, all of them. So,
Wow. That's an awesome deal.
It is.
Now, for myself, I found that this is the beginning of our Poe for season 3, and I say that I can't think of a better way to start it with Masque of the Red Death, because I really, really enjoyed it. I have read Poe in the past. Hot Frog, this is the first time I read this.
Yeah, same.
I had to sit there and say that I've had the book, and there was a while, I think I got to page like 300, and I was reading like something Poe every single day. Not recently, but 8 years ago, because I've actually never read Poe, and I was actually getting right into it. But then I got to a point, because I was so heavily entrenched in it, I had to read something modern, and then I never went back. But I have to then say that The Masque of the Red Death, I was totally floored by it. I really, really liked it a lot. I think it's a strong story. I think it's, I can understand why it's one of his strongest, that the critics love the most, outside of The Raven. And Hot Frog, I was totally blown away by it. I really, really enjoyed it. It's one of those things, okay, I would have to read Hot Frog. We kind of, for our listeners out there, we covered, Hot Frog was an added addition because we realized that it was part of the film that we're going to be covering after the commercial break. And we figured, okay, Hot Frog's a part of this, Bo, right? So we might as well read this. And I thought, oh God, do I really need to? And I read it, but I read it last night on my way home, and I was really engrossed with it. I really loved it. So I'm kind of thankful that it was part of it, because it gave me one more. And I would highly suggest for people who are getting into Poe to, this is a good place to start. So to read those. So what I'm going to do, we're going to come to a commercial break and listen to a word from our sponsors in the trailer for Masque of the Red Death, a 1964 Roger Corman film. And we'll be back after a word from our sponsor.
Amazon. Oops, wrong Amazon. Although we both contain an array of diversity, the rainforest with all of its animals and us with all of our products, come check us over today and find all the products you need quickly and efficiently. And buy it with one click. And now you can even use us to donate to your favorite charities using Amazon Smile. Amazon Smile is worth your while. Come check us out today.
We are one planet. We share one extraordinary home. We are millions of wonders, but we are all one world. If we only get one chance to save our planet, to protect it for the next generation, then we have to take it. This is our chance. This is our fight. For our planet, for our home, for all of us. Join WWF today.
Garazzo.
No, I beg of you. Mercy, mercy.
Lord Satan, send me a demon, so I may know I'm to be your wife.
I want to help save your soul so you can join me in the glories of hell.
No, never.
Diamonds, rubies, emeralds, pearls.
Each man creates his own heaven, his own hell.
Let me see your face.
morning face. You get it when you don't sleep well. This is what happened to Linda.
Morning, guys.
Good morning. Ah! What is that thing?
It's me, Linda.
Oh my God, it talks! Run!
No, it's me, Linda from HR.
It looks hungry! Save the children! Save them! Stay back, I've got mace!
Ow, that went in my eyes.
Quit moving!
It's called beauty sleep for a reason. And there's never been a better time to get some.
Get 20% off IKEA Sultan mattresses. IKEA, love your home.
Hello?
What's your favorite scary movie?
I have a bunch of favorite movies. I watch them all on Shudder.com for only $4.99 a month.
That's a scary low price.
But if I had to pick a favorite, it'd probably be Scream.
Oh.
Yeah, it's the only streaming service that lets me watch hundreds of horror movies on demand.
I'll be right back.
Hello? Hello? Hello, are you gonna subscribe? Hello?
Go to Shudder.com to subscribe, if you dare.
Hello, welcome back to Literary License Podcast. So now we'll be discussing The Masque of the Red Death, a 1964 film directed by Roger Corman and starring Vincent Price. The story does follow a prince who terrorizes a plague-ridden peasantry while merrymaking in a lonely castle with his jaded courtiers. The screenplay was written by Charles Beaumont and R. Wright Campbell. This is one of the ones that Richard Matheson didn't write. He did write all the other Poe adaptations for Roger Corman for this cycle. This is the seventh film of a series of 8 Corman film adaptations, largely based on Poe's work. Now, the interesting thing about Charles Beaumont, we'll cover him a little bit, but he did do a couple more Poe adaptations. He did The Premature Burial. He also did Haunted Palace that we discussed earlier. But Charles Beaumont wrote one of my all-time favorite films that we covered last year, which is The Seven Faces of Dr. Lao. He wrote the screenplay for that.
Yeah, Keith loves that. That was actually a pretty cool movie, though.
I love that movie. Now, another interesting thing about The Masque of the Red Death, as Vicky pointed out previously, that they use the same sets as Beckett, and then Roger Corman was very economical. Now, this is out of all the Poe adaptions, all the Poe films are made within 3 weeks. This one took 5 weeks, or 5 to 6 weeks, but Roger Corman liked to sit there and say that it took 4 weeks because English workers work slower than Americans.
Yeah, is that a slam dunk or something?
Well,
they have to stop for tea, right?
Yeah, we have a lot of tea breaks. But this was actually made in England, and so that's probably why it gave us interesting look. Now, another reason why this film has a slightly different look than the rest of the Poe series is that it was the cinematographer on this was a well-known, who would have become a well-known director named Nicholas Roeg. Now, those people who don't know Nicholas Roeg, he wrote Don't Look Now. He directed that film with Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie, which is rated X when it came out due to the heavy sex scenes.
I just love the ratings that they had back then. Just like, I mean, everything would be rated X in prime time now if they could just see it back then.
Now, another good thing is that it had a bunch of lovely English lovies in it. Jane Asher, this is one of hers. She is an English icon now. She went from being a grade 8 actress in the 60s to making cakes in the 80s. Then, of course, we did have David Weston, Nigel Green, and Patrick McGee. And Patrick McGee, of course, is quite a famous actor as well.
Hazel Court, what else was she in? I could not find anything about her. Her face was extremely familiar.
Who, Jane Asher?
Hazel
she was
Court.
Paul McCartney's main squeeze.
Hazel Court, Juliana.
Yeah.
Oh, Hazel Court? Oh, she's a scream queen. She's very famous. She was in The Raven. She was in, she's done a lot of Alfred Hitchcock TV shows.
So
what else
maybe that's why her face looks familiar so much, because she looks like she's got one of those faces. I guess she's been in a lot of them that I just haven't noticed. It was
she was in Curse of Frankenstein with Peter Cushing. She was in that too.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's where it is. Okay.
Now, what's quite interesting about Jane Asher is that this is before Beatlemania. This is before the Beatles came out. And she was dating Paul McCartney at the time. And during the middle of filming, Roger Corman was with Jane Asher, and they're talking. And she goes, "Oh, do you mind if my boyfriend comes and visits?" And he said, "Fine." And Paul McCartney showed up. later on, and they were going to go out. And Paul McCartney and his band were going to make their debut in London, as their first London. And the day after that, the Beatles were born and became a national, what we know as the Beatles today. But this is just before that. So you got to meet Paul McCartney during the making of this film. Another interesting thing is that Roger Corman wanted to make this his second Poe film after The Fall of the House of Usher. But due to the Seventh Seal being released of Bergman, he didn't want people to think that he was copying Bergman's The Seventh Seal. So that's the reason why Masque of the Red Death was made years later, after towards the end of the Poe cycles than the beginning, which is quite interesting. And I guess another thing that makes this quite interesting is that it was all done at Pinewood Studios as well, which is a very famous movie theater here.
Right.
So, well, cinema, place to film, not movie theater, but place to film, a film studio, I should say.
Well, that's where they do Star Wars and all that, right?
Yeah, they're doing Star Wars there. And a lot of the Jim Henson's Dark Crystal was made here. The Labyrinth was made here.
Aliens was too.
Yeah,
Didn't
Raiders.
Alex Gordon sue them for saying that they stole his script on this?
Who's Alex Gordon? I don't know who
He was
Alex
one
Gordon
of the, apparently, he was one of the, you know these things.
Oh, yes. He claimed, I remember that. He claimed to have had the rights to it or something.
The film was based on a script that he'd written, and I guess they stole it, and so they made a big deal out of it.
Because what happened, there's a number of rival adaptations of Masque being mooted around at this time, and the Warner Brothers announced a film based on the story, as did producer Alex Gordon, who said he had Price's star, but apparently he didn't have Price's star, and Price did nothing about Alex Gordon's version of Masque of the Red Death, so that's what kind of squashed that. But yeah, it came out around this time. I guess same time that,
Someone's successful.
We had Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca at the same time, and that came out, and all these people came out of the woodwork and said that she stole her novel. Stole her novel. So, which she kind of did from other people, but it's not from the people who are saying, sort of thing.
I love that movie.
I'm trying to place
Rebecca.
the movie The Young Racers with Patrick McGee. For some reason, I'm drawing blank on that one. I don't know why.
Now, another interesting thing, there is a third short story that they did use in The Masque of the Red Death to help flesh it out. And it's not a Poe story, but it's called Torture by Hope by Auguste Villiers de Laison Dame.
There you go. You did really good. You did not.
Wow.
Thank you. And that was a subplot. And I've never read Torture by Hope. I probably never will, but I guess it'll be when we discuss the movie. I imagine this subplot probably will come out, and they probably are parts of Tortures of Hope, whatever that is. So, Vicky, do you have anything about the making of The Masque of Red Death?
That to me. No, we got back to that. AIP had a co-production deal with Ingo Amalgamated in England, and I guess they kind of pushed Corman to make the film there. Did he not want to make that somewhere else? You guys are more Corman fanatics than myself, but they said it could qualify for an Edie Levy and increase the budget. And so I'm looking at, is this like, what do you call them? Pell Grants for filmmakers? Is that what it was?
Yeah, basically what happened is at that time, England wanted more American productions being filmed there. So what they were doing is they're giving a rebate for people who are filming there. And the money, and the portion of the money that the American companies were giving, they were giving to English filmmakers to be able to come out with English films. So it's basically
they wanted them Americanized on the same token?
No, basically what they were doing is like, oh, you've come to England and make a movie, then what we'll do is we'll give you a tax cut on this. And with the money that we're making on the tax cut, what we'll do is we'll give that money to smaller English productions so English directors can make English movies. So it's in a way to bring the movie and make it more circle. So that way...
They still do that, don't they?
They still do that to a certain degree. Sometimes it goes in and out, like when Star Wars was here, that was what was going on here at the time. And then because England made so much money on Star Wars, and then Thatcherism kind of put a bosh to that. And then after that, then they started this back up, and that's why a lot more films are being made here again, because they got that tax break. It's the reason why they go to Canada to film TV series. They get
because it's cheaper.
It ends up being cheaper, and they get a tax break. It's a tax break, but with that there does come some restrictions. In this case, it's like you can only have like so many American workers on the film, sort of thing.
Yeah, I read that before.
So in this case with Roger Corman, if you look at the other films up to this point, which we will be covering over the course of this year, but they're all done with the same crew, the same, you've seen the same actors and stuff like this, going in and out of these films. Where this one, the reason why this one feels differently, because it is a different, cinematographer, the editors are different. Of course, we have a totally different cast outside of Vincent Price as well, and that's what would happen because you'd have to hire mainly English crew and English actors, though you could carry a couple Americans over with you.
I did notice they tried to do a 1989 remake on it. I've never seen the remake, or they tried to do. They cast included British actors, Patrick Macnee and Adrian Paul.
Adrian Paul is Highlander, the TV series Highlander.
Oh, geez, I would watch anything he was in. That's just a piece of eye candy. I am sorry, guys, but he just is. And the use of music I thought was interesting because I got a kick out of it. The intro, Beneath the Mask, was by doom metal band called Bell Witch. I just love that. I don't know why I love that. I have to go look for that music now because I just like the name of the band. And also, Dell Comics published a comic book adaptation by the film, which is probably worth a lot of money. You can get your hands on one. But I didn't realize that it turned into a comic book as well.
Which one are you talking about? The Price version or this other one with
the new
Price version?
The original version. But no, I didn't know they did a remake of it, and I didn't. He had to Adrian Paul. I couldn't place him for a second, but now that I do,
I see.
That blazed into my memory. But I didn't know they made a comic book out of it as well.
Well, Dell Comics had an understanding with Roger Corman, and all the Poe films were turned into, with the Vincent Price, were turned into comic books.
I did not know that.
So for under Dell.
Interesting.
Well, you're talking to a comic book collector, and I was also old enough to be a kid when that movie came out, and I bought that comic, and I still have it. And I have Ligeia as well, and Two on a Guillotine was another one that I have. Which was
so cool.
Yeah, that was somewhere around that time, but the Masque of the Red Death has a scene on the front of Vincent Price holding the hawk. I don't know if you remember that scene. He had a hawk on his arm, and in the background are all the deaths that have gathered under a tree or whatever, all the different colored deaths. But it is worth quite a bit of money if you can find it. But I only paid 12 cents for it. That's how much they were in those days.
How much is it worth now, if you don't mind me? Is it worth anything?
Oh, it's probably worth, it's not that much, but it's enough. I mean, it's probably about $45, I'd say.
It'd be worth more than that.
I think it's worth more than that. I mean, if you especially find the right collector, you probably get thousands for it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you get thousands for it. I mean,
is it in mint condition?
I wouldn't say it's mint, but it's near mint. I would say I was very anal when it came to protecting my comics, and I would read them not with rubber gloves on, but it was pretty close to that. I mean, I didn't want food anywhere near them because food is definitely a soda, anything that might splatter onto these things. Those are the ultra enemies of comic books.
God, yes.
So you heard it here first. Rod was a very anal child.
I was very anal. I wanted. You haven't seen me when I'm still like that. If I have to put a picture on the wall, I will stand back, look at it, adjust it slightly, go back, adjust it slightly. I mean, finally, I get it right, and then I leave the room. When I come in, it's right back to where it was before I even touched it. It's still crooked. It's because the house moves when there's traffic. When traffic goes by. So anyway. Are you done, Vicki? Or I don't want to take your time.
No, you guys are ad-libbing incorporating some very interesting little factoids. But no, that was pretty much what I noticed. Keith is like the brains when it comes to the screenplays and everything else. He's like a fountain of information. So
that's because
he likes to always get me. I should always know. I need to be ready more for him. And he always says, "Well, what did he bounces around? What did I think about the production?" Or he'll go over here. I just never know what he's going to hit me with. So it's just like I try to have all my notes highlighted and everything else that he still.
It's best to keep people on, on pins and needles around me.
He does this to me every freaking podcast.
So, Rod, do you have anything about the making of the Masque of Red Death before we go into the actual discussion?
Yeah, after, the making of and all that stuff, either I would read about it in Famous Monsters of Filmland, which was being published and really was the #1 magazine for monster files during that period, although Castle of Frankenstein also gave it a run for its money. I don't know what they had in the UK, and I'm sure they must have had something. But it was like, in those days, we always thought that monsters and people like that came from the UK. Now everybody thinks that zombies and vampires come from Maine. I don't know why I've actually had people call me and saying, Maine, huh? Do you have a lot of zombies up there? I said, no. How about vampires? or werewolves or something like that. It's all got shifted over here. But as far as Masque of the Red Death, I can't give you any information about the making of, but I can say as a kid, and I was in 1964, I was 10 years old, I would say that I can remember going to a movie and standing in the lobby and seeing the poster for Masque of the Red Death, which fascinated me because his nose was a woman's rump. Have you've seen that picture, haven't you?
Yeah.
I mean, it was like, wow, and I haven't seen the poster in a long time. I don't know if it's all made up of writhing bodies, his face, but I think it is.
It was kind of like an orgy, basically. You
Yeah,
know? It was Bacchanalia or something that was going on.
Yes, but for me, all I needed to do was read the words Vincent Price, because Vincent Price in those days was the baby boomers. I mean, Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee held those positions as well, but they were British. So American-born and bred was Vincent Price, and he was just, his presence was so, he could be funny, he could be evil. I liked him better when he was evil, but he played a lot of tortured heroes.
Right.
And I became an all-time, he's my favorite actor, although my favorite actor beyond him is Gregory Peck, but I would say my all-time favorite actor is Vincent Price, and I've watched a lot of his movies, including Laura, where he played straight parts and stuff like that. I much preferred him as the evil guy.
And
House of Wax, which is a great movie. Even the crazy ones like The Tingler and stuff like that. I love them all because he takes them very seriously. Yeah. But in Masque of the Red Death, his performance was incredible. I mean, he convinced me that he was, that's the difference between the novel and the book, the story, and the movie is that there is definitely a line of devil worship and selling your soul to the devil put in throughout the movie. That there was nobody at this party, for example, who was good. They were all evil, and they all wanted to drink and carouse and fornicate and do all kinds of things. And it was all evil. Nothing was good. I didn't get that impression from the story. I got the impression that these people weren't necessarily evil, but they weren't evil, and they weren't necessarily good either, but somewhere in between. But in the movie, it's definitely evil, and the only goodness in there, the only examples of goodness are Hop Frog and his lady, and I think it was Francesca who Jane Asher played.
Well, I mean, her father and the boyfriend there.
And Gino.
And
Gino, I think Gino lives, yes. The Red Death helps him out, I believe. And, and the father dies.
I think Gino looked like Russ Tamblyn.
Yeah.
He did. I'm trying to think of him.
He had that Russ Tamblyn look
David
from
Weston is Gino, Francesca's lover.
But he did remind me of Russ Tamblyn in The Haunting or Riff and West Side Story or.
I couldn't understand Russ Tamblyn. He was a great dancer on top of that. He was even in Father of the Bride as Elizabeth Taylor's brother when he was a kid.
Yeah.
and within the year of doing The Haunting, he's doing War of the Gargantuas for Japanese Toho Studios.
Oh, I love War. That's one of my favorite.
War of the Gargantuas, he's in that. There's the brown and the green Gargantua, and they fight. They have a big fight. But he was in that. And
no kidding. I didn't know that.
He's in Twin Peaks. He's still living.
Yeah,
he came up to Maine.
Twin Peaks
Yeah.
is the ultimate in dysfunctional, but you gotta love it.
I mean, I think that Vincent Price was a god. I'm totally with you. Scream Factory about 8 years ago started releasing these box sets of Vincent Price on Blu-ray, where they remastered everything and had all these bonus. And I bought volumes 1, 2, and 3 with all the Vincent Price. But I do have a Vincent Price doll from Fall of the House of Ushers. And I do
How'd you get that?
I got it for Christmas one year, and I do have a Vincent.
You actually made a doll, like an action.
You would be surprised what you can find with a credit card and the internet now.
Yeah, and I have a Vincent Price bobblehead.
Yeah, I remember seeing you showing me that before. That's funny.
Yeah, but yeah, so I had like the Vincent Price. All the House
Oh
of
my
Ushers.
God, you do.
I do. There it is. So yeah, but yeah, I mean, I'm a huge Vincent Price fan, and I love Vincent Price. He's one of these people that he's kind of an enigma. And the thing is that he's intelligent, but you never hear a bad word said about him at all.
No, you don't.
No.
He's professional. He would go up to people and just be really lovely, and he embraced, the thing is, as his career went on, he did find himself in horror films, and a lot of actors would have snubbed their nose at it, go, okay, I'm doing this for the money, I don't care, and I'm not going to talk about this, but not him. He embraced everything.
He did.
And I have to sit there and say, and I think that it pays. They took everything seriously. He did make some clunkers, that we probably will cover on this because I don't want to disgrace his thing. But he did make some clunkers. But, the same thing is that he will talk about his clunkers along with his fantastic, films that did very, very well and ones that he's known for. And, he treats everything with as much respect as everything. And he never turned his nose down on anything. And I think that's why Vincent Price is the person and the legend that he's always going to be. And I think 100 years from now, people are going to know who Vincent Price is. They're always going to know who Vincent Price is.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
What was so startling about him? I mean, when my sister first started bringing me to the movies, one of the very first ones I saw in 1959 was House on Haunted Hill. That was my introduction to Vincent Price, and I wasn't so much scared of him as the movie, which I still find. It does give you a few shocks in that film. If you ever cover that, I'd like to be involved in that. And then he did the Tingler, which I thought was over the top. But when I'm 6 years old, I think that thing is scary, and that it comes from the human body. And if you scream,
what about the color sequence in the Tingler? That has that color sequence.
Oh yeah, that was horrible.
That's frightening.
And you know what I read about that color sequence? I don't know if this is true or not, but that it actually looks quite weird if you watch it. That everything was painted to look off-white, including the woman wearing off-white makeup, and it wasn't really colorized. Only the blood was color.
Okay.
Was not affected by the white. That scene, all the walls and everything was painted white, and she wore a white ghastly makeup, so it looked like she was, of course she was on her way out anyway, as we know.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's true or not, but I know Vincent Price was and then when he did House of Usher, I'll never forget this. I mean, I have a pretty good memory. I went to see The Ladies' Man with my parents, and that was a Jerry Lewis movie, who was huge in that time, Jerry Lewis, and they showed a preview for House of Usher. And I thought, I've got to see that. And when I went to see that movie, his look was so striking. In fact, in all his movies ever, I'd say that's the one where he looks the most striking. He has no facial hair whatsoever, and his hair is silver. You've seen it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's such an amazing look. His eyes were very blue, and that movie scared me. But, there's only four actors in the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at Vincent Price's career, I mean, he's got some iconic films. The Fly, the original Fly.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I know. That always cracks me. I know there wasn't the effects, but the only thing
the end's funny
about The Fly to me that was the Vincent Price is when they put his face on the fly.
Well, you have to sit there and say that, even though it's kind of funny, but at the same time, it's like it's done really well.
It is.
If you look at the time period, it's like help me, that big rock sort of thing. But I mean, Vincent. I mean, if you look at, he did the first version of I Am Legend.
Right.
Yes, he did.
And he's an icon. So I guess that brings us into actually discussing the film, The Masque of the Red Death. Vicky,
right.
what are your thoughts about The Masque of the Red Death, the film?
The film, I thought I was really kind of surprised. I mean, I always say this every time I watch something from the 50s and 60s at how risque things were. I mean, I look at it with eyes like that. It's just like, wow, we're so jaded now because of the stuff that we see. But I mean, it really was a bacchanalia, basically. And it was like, it seemed like they were behind the gates and everything, but it just looked like one big going on orgy until, the Red Death was over outside. And I thought it was kind of funny how they had all the satanic stuff in there, because usually when you think that era, you think satanic, you think Peter Cushing, Vincent Price, and Lee, for the most part. And what I also kind of liked how they put the deaths together at the end, but going fast, rewind back, how they had the red hooded figure shuffling the tarot cards, and he gives the woman the white rose, which turns, from white to red. And so it kind of sits like, okay, well, this isn't going to end well, and we're not even into the movie yet. So, and everybody wants to bang Francesca. It's like,
well, after they gave her a bath, that was, because apparently
it
wasn't time for a yearly bath until Prospero dips her in. I have to sit there and say that what's quite interesting about this film is that I like the way that it sets the scene. You have to first you get this striking image of the old woman, and the Red Death figure, or Death, I guess he's supposed to play Death, and he gives her the white rose, and it's like all of a sudden it's like you get to and it's quite beautifully the way it's filmed. It's kind of like and it felt like you're entering a fairy tale here. We're gonna start entering this Gothic fairy tale, and then it just. I like the way that Vincent Price, then all of a sudden you get introduced to Vincent Price at this town. And I mean, they almost run over this baby.
Yeah, no, the guys that snatch the baby from out in the middle of the road. I mean, they don't give a shit. These people are just mean.
Well, what's quite interesting is that this is what's quite different, as what Rod was saying from the book, story is that now we got a Prospero that is just evil. And the thing is, okay, he's got the boyfriend and the father of Francesca, and he takes Francesca away. Before he puts her away, there's a woman screaming in the background, and I go, you need to deal with her. What do you want us to do? I'll deal with it. And that he goes off and just kills her just because she's screaming.
Well, he tells them once or twice, so somebody just deal with this. I have to go and do everything, basically. So
and then another thing is we're set in the end of fall, the beginning of winter. And what does he do? He burns down the village, leaving these people homeless. So these people are going to starve to death. When they're asked about, what do we do about food? It's like, well, do what the animals do, and
forage,
and forage, and basically he left his, and he's the king of this village. And this is the way he's treating it.
It's just like the dark overlord.
And then what I also found quite interesting about the Masque of the Red Death, that there is not a redeeming quality about Prospero in this whatsoever.
No, none at all.
And Vincent Price does this, he doesn't chew the scenery at all. He's quite restrained in this film as well, as far as, what sometimes you can get with Vincent Price.
He does, though. Maybe that's not true, though, because he has a soft spot for Francesca.
I think he does.
In a weird way.
Yeah, but I think
he lets her go, doesn't he? At the end, doesn't he let her go?
I think. Well, he does let her go, but I think the reason why it's not that he has a soft spot for her. I think he's fixated on her because she has a faith that is true and strong, and even though he calls himself a Satanist, I think it's that he doesn't have a 100% belief in him being a Satanist. I think he believes in Satan. He likes being known as a Satanist. It's like those people who goes, I'm a Satanist, and then they, but they've never actually, they'd actually never actually,
drank live chicken blood or anything like that,
or done anything like that. It's like people go, I'm a vampire. Like they go to New Orleans, I'm a vampire, and walk around in Victorian clothing, but they've actually never killed anyone.
About the reception of this movie, though, but with all the satanic activity and references and everything, I was wondering how this was received by the Christian public, because I haven't seen too much on it.
Well, when the film came out, it wasn't the highest out of all the Poe films. This didn't make the most money. It did okay, but it had to do with. I think one of the critics was saying that the film, he blamed it on that it ran a bit slower than some of the other films. Though watching it this time,
well, someone said Sam Arkoff called it being too arty-farty and not scary enough.
yeah. And to me personally, I didn't find it. I'm glad I saw it on Blu-ray. I had seen it before when it was on Monster Movie Matinee and Syracuse Television back when I was growing up on Beyond the Afternoon.
They always played Vincent Price everything.
But I have to sit there and say that watching this in Blu-ray in the full widescreen with all the bright colors and stuff like this, I was mesmerized by the film, watching it in the way it was meant to be seen. And it's a beautiful looking film to look at. But I also found that
very colorful.
But I do think that you're dealing with there's a lot of stories that are going on here at one time, which you don't normally get with a film of this kind of. Or normally you get one story and that's pretty much it, and then you go from the A to B until the film ends with one story. Here we had quite a few different stories going on. We got the Hobfrog story going on with the dwarf and Chipetta going on. So we got that story going on at the same time as we got Hazel Court's character going on with her selling her soul to Satan and the whole part there. Of course, that part was actually cut a little bit for censors because it was a bit more risque than what we see. But we have that storyline going on as well. Meanwhile, we got the Vincent Price and the Francesca storyline going on, and Francesca and her family storyline going on at the same time about whether, how they're going to get out of this situation. And then we also got the whole Red Death situation going on. So I think that's probably, for the masses of that time. And you got to remember that these films are normally shown as a double feature. And sometimes you would get these at a theater, but a lot of times those are AIP movies are a lot of times shown at drive-ins as well.
Right.
And so I think that you got a story that's very, very complex for a story of this ilk from what came before. I mean, if you said with the House of Usher, 4 people, if you look at the other stories that they Pit and the Pendulum, you have pretty much a straight story. Where this one, The Masque of the Red Death, they did layer a lot of stories going on at the same time here. And I think that, maybe that might be the reason why it's considered too arty-farty, because it's not your typical straightforward story. There's a lot going on here, and there's a lot to unpack. And I think that's what makes the movie. It may not have made the most money in its time, but it's known as the best Corman Poe abduction ever now. Later on, looking back on it. So
I guess did they cut that where she was supposed to having her consummation with the devil?
Yeah, what happened is that she was wearing like a muslin, and apparently her breasts were
a diaphanous gown. I'm gonna have to look up diaphanous. This could
you
be
can
the
still
word
see
today,
it.
guys.
You can still see her nipples.
Yeah,
okay.
it's just
God.
They twist the. I mean, she's having like a reverie or something like that after she's branded herself with an upside down cross in this black room, and she goes into like a reverie, and she's running, and she lies down on an altar, and like a witch doctor comes out and starts doing all kinds of dancing around her and pretends to stab her, and all these people come to pretend to stab her, and you can clearly see
version of whatever from each faith. What it looked
like. It was almost like a Rosemary's Baby. You remember when they all gathered around?
Exactly,
and the devil, that's basically what's happening in this movie. But for me, the biggest difference between the movie and the story, again, is that Prospero is so evil that when he does let her go, even though it might be because he's just fascinated by her faith, he could have tried to change her faith. He never really did. He did see her wearing a cross when they threw her in the bathtub, I believe. And he says, "What is that?" Yeah, he makes her take it off. But he never tries to force her to get into devil worship like the other woman was. Was that his wife? I can't remember if that was his Juliana, I think her name was.
She was
his consort?
Juliana.
Yeah, it was his mistress.
Okay, yeah, nice way of calling him. Basically, what she is. But I mean, he kills those 2 people. It starts out with when he heard somebody screaming. I thought he he went into the hut and he saw that it was the old lady. Suddenly she turns around, she's got blood all over her face, and he goes, "The Black Death is here. The Red Death is here. Burn the place to the ground."
Yeah.
And then that was almost like the impetus for him wanting to isolate himself in the castle. You know, that he knew the Red Death was around, and so he was going to try to prevent it from getting him. And of course, he wanted to be amused at the same time. With these all evil goers, these party goers who are also black-hearted like he is. And then the hop frog scene is easily inserted into this.
Easily.
That's what, yeah, very easily, where they have a jester, which they might very well have, and there's a little ballerina, you know, entertaining the people. And I think in the movie, she was dancing and she accidentally kicked over a goblet of wine, and the man
goblet.
Yeah, and he throws it in her face. And she says in a voice that sounds like Mae West.
Yeah.
It was it's like so that. She was like a 5-year-old. I mean, she was a real little girl. Yes, and she starts speaking like Mae West. Come on up and see me sometime. It's so weird.
It was. The voiceover was like, come on.
Well, the reason why they did that is because they tried to find a female
dwarf,
midget or dwarf, or someone who was well proportioned,
a small person
who could dance, and they couldn't find one in England. So they went to a ballet class and found her, and they figured.
Oh, really?
And because they didn't have much time to do this, basically they put everything together within 2 weeks, and they started filming as soon as they arrived.
How old was she? Do you have that in your records?
She was 8.
Oh, she was 8. Oh, that's older than I thought she was.
And they used her, and then they figured, well, we can do this, even though this is not ideally what we want, but this is what we have available to us, and we only got this set of time to film, because before they had 3 weeks to film. They would do 2 weeks worth of pre-production, 3 hours of filming, 3 weeks of filming, and then they had 2 weeks of editing, and the film went out. Here, They did it. You know, they had 2 weeks, but that part of that 2 weeks of pre-production was traveling to England, and then they had to get everyone together really, really quickly. And then, unfortunately, that this is what they had. They said if they could go back and redo it, they probably could have, but if they were in America, they probably had more choice. But they dealt with what they had to, and I think I think that. It does, outside of her voice is a bit unsettling, because you can tell that it's kind of dubbed, because it doesn't really match the girl's voice. But if they had a different voice for it, I think it probably would have played better, because you got Hobfrog, who is infatuated with this little girl, but you don't really see the infatuation as being ew. And it could have that really ew fact to it.
I have a question for you. Was that Kenny Baker? Hopfrog?
Hopfrog was Skip Martin.
Now, was he in Berserk? I mean, I've seen that actor before.
Yes, he was in Berserk.
Oh, he was? Okay, with Monica Withers. He kept calling her Withers instead of Rivers. Well, Monica Withers.
Because he had a bit of a lisp, didn't he? He had a bit of a lisp.
Yeah, he did. He did.
Now, I think what's also quite funny about... I'll tell you how not funny about how horrible Prospero is. Do you remember when the nobleman shows up with his wife and he's begging to be put in?
Yeah.
And then he goes, and this nobleman said, you can have my wife, who he owes his virtue. His wife is his virtue.
Basically, he's already had her.
And he's already had her. And then he kills her, and then he just leaves her out there. And he gives her a knife to here, you might as well kill yourself, because you're going to be that, or the Red Death's going to get you. And you're thinking, God, and then Jane Asher's like, playing the whole heroin thing.
Yeah, I think that's when he mentioned the devil the first time. Somewhere around there, when they're out on the battlements, he says something about the devil. He whispers it.
Mm. And I thought that, and it's quite, there's no sign of goodness in Prospero at all. And they just compound this over and over. And outside of what, he this kind But then again, when you were talking about he lets Francesca go, but does he let her go? Because he thinks he's letting Francesca go. Here, I'm going to let you go now because you can go free. But knowing that once she leaves, that she's going to die the Red Death, because he doesn't know that there's been a pact made.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
But
He
also,
doesn't
did
know.
you think it was weird though? She kind of kissed him on the cheek when she leaves, because at first she was totally repulsed by him, but now.
But see, I think that she started being. It's kind of like a blessing and a curse sort of thing for the Francesca character. From what I can gather from watching the film this time around, is that she's holier than thou. They cleanse her, so she's kind of being reborn into this virgin-y type of character, even though chances are she's probably had everyone in that village before they bathed her. If we look at the reality of the situation, people didn't save themselves from marriage back when you're poor. You just kind of like were passed around like.
But where are her children? More than likely, she had children. That was probably her kid, the one in the roadway.
Precisely, the one that her boyfriend was saving. So you don't really, we don't really know nothing beyond that she has a boyfriend and a father. That's pretty much all we know about her.
Right.
But what I can get from Francesca is that she's the holier than thou character. She's been kind of reborn here, and she's holding her virtue. But when he lets her boyfriend go, she gives herself over to Prospero, and once she does that, did you notice that all of a sudden her style, her dress has changed and her demeanor changed? She's no longer. She's kind of like embracing this new life that she's going to be part of. And as you notice, is like now, before she she goes through the rooms, she goes through all the different colored rooms, and she enters the black room, and then she sees, Prospero, open his eyes, and she screams. But by the end of the movie, she's willing to go into the black room. She's willing to embrace this new life of hers.
I never even noticed that.
And that's when he lets her go. Once that she's going to embrace this life that she could have.
That's right.
It's like, I'm going to give you all the riches, all the jewels and everything like this. And she, she's a common person. She's not well educated. She's got her religion and that's pretty much it. But she doesn't know the ways of the world, which she says over and over again, that she doesn't know the ways of the world, that I'm uneducated. I don't know these things. And then when he, if you think about it, he's done, maybe it wasn't a sign of love that he let her go. She might think it was a sign of love that he let her go, but, he's pushing her out into the world of, you're going back to being poor. You're not going to have this warmth. You're going out to the cold. You're not going to be fed. Your town is gone. Your father's dead. And for all we know, your boyfriend's dead. So nice knowing you, bitch. Off you go. And he sends her back out. So, maybe it is not a sign of kindness. This is maybe part of his cruelty. It's the kind of person that someone who's starving, and then basically you're just eating food in front of them the whole time. And you might throw them like a crust of stale bread, but that doesn't mean that you're showing kindness to them. That means you're making their mouth water for more.
You're right. She did become a cake decorator.
Yeah, I know. They used to make jokes about it over here.
She has aged really well, though. She's still quite attractive.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably, and that's part of Prospero, that Prospero doesn't really redeem himself at all. And the only time that Prospero, his best friend, even though, he has his best friend who ends up dressing up as a orangutan to Hobfrog kills, he's cruel to his good friend. This is his good friend, and he's cruel to him. He's mean to them. You can have her, but you're not going to. He does this to everyone. Offers them something and pulls away, and then then when you see how he treats his guests, he's like, "No, I want you to be a worm." And
I know. They'll do anything for him. It's just like have some dignity, man. And then the unattractive, she's the one that screams. She's kind of like the unattractive, whatever. And he makes her do stupid shit. And it's just like, man.
But think about it. What happens if you don't? What happens to you if you don't play along with this game?
Probably going to get
You're kicked out. You're kicked out into the.
Yeah, you're going to be kicked out, and your safe haven's not going to no longer be there. He holds all the cards. And the thing is, and he gets so how cruel he is. I mean, look about when he's throwing jewels at them. He goes, look at them, they're rich. They don't need the money, but you just look at them crawling onto the ground, just getting whatever they can get. These are the kind of people they are. And this is Prospero's game. This whole thing is Prospero's game. And the only time that you see him changing is that when he realizes that death is coming to him, and he realizes that he is death. That's all of a sudden he crumbles a little bit, because now it's about him. Oh my God, I'm going to die. Oh my God, what's going to happen to me? So that kind of, he doesn't give a fuck about anyone.
No, basically,
he didn't.
So he's going to die. It's still all about him.
Well, he thinks that death is Satan. He does say something like, "You've come at last," or something. And I forgot about the woman screaming. I think she actually screams when Juliana gets attacked by the raven and dies, and she sees the body on the floor. I thought it was when the orangutan burnt, but I think it's then. And he killed Juliana too, didn't he? He wanted her out of the way, essentially, because when he walks in.
Well, she doesn't fit in well as a courtesan when he's got his new main squeeze coming in.
Well, you got to also remember that Julian's quite an interesting character, because the thing is that she wants to be, Vincent Price's main person here. And what she does, he sells herself to Satan to become closer to Prospero.
Right.
But that time he's like, you sold yourself to someone else. You should have sold yourself to me. And that's the reason why he forbids her. It has nothing to do with Francesca. He can deal with more than one lover. This is Prospero. He can do with how he can sit there and have a mass orgy and pay everyone as much attention as he wants, or as little attention, because he holds all the cards. But he throws Juliana away because Juliana sold herself to Satan and not to him. And I think that's the reason why he doesn't take, that throws Juliana away. It has nothing to do with Francesca coming into the picture, because he's fine with he could do both of them. He's okay. He can do what he wants.
Yeah, that's true.
But I think it's more of
thought that he maybe was like,
No, I don't. I think Prospero's. I mean, he slept with the married woman because he could. I think he would have. If he probably would have had sex with Francesca because he wants to. He wants her to break her down so much that she just gives himself, and then he'll just like, when she's begging for it, oh please, Prospero, give it to me. He's gonna like, fuck you, I don't want you anymore. He's that kind of person.
Yeah.
What do you guys think about the other masked figures towards the end? You had the white death, the yellow death, the golden death, the blue death, the violet death, the black death. And
what's quite interesting is that when they all come together, each death goes, how many people have you taken, and they talk about all their victims. So that means these are a bunch of different diseases. So basically, and I thought it was quite interesting that their colors match the rooms in Prospero's house.
Exactly.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, because you had the white room, the white death, the yellow room, the yellow death, the golden death is kind of like the more golden color, I guess, suppose. The blue death, violet death, and the black death, which are all the different rooms of the house.
Interesting.
And they all, I guess they would, to me, they symbolize the very many different diseases that you can die from.
Right.
Yeah, you can think that you're greater than thou, but let's face it, at the end of the day, it's disease that's going to kill you. No one dies of natural causes. There's no such thing.
But the red death.
Say death has no master. Well, the red cloaked figure said death has no master. So it's basically, it's one appointment we're all going to keep. Even Prospero.
Yeah, that's right. But he also spares people. He spared Francesca and her boyfriend and the tiny dancer. He says tiny dancer, I think, there. He said that a tiny dancer and her consort or whatever. And this little girl that he's playing cards with, and an old man in the village, which has no explanation.
Why do you think he spared the little girl? I mean, I'm speaking Prospero.
But
he killed everybody else, but he let that little girl live.
But you got to remember, when it comes to diseases, and when you look at diseases in reality or in works of fiction, let's take Stephen King's The Stand. Right. You have this disease in The Stand that wipes off everybody but a handful of people.
Right.
Yeah.
You take Ebola. Ebola wipes off a bunch of people in a village but keeps one or two alive. Why is that? Why are some people immune to a disease that can kill it? That killed tuberculosis was going through killing Black Plague, went through and wiped out most of Europe. But yet but didn't affect other people. It's not because they were cleaners. These people were living in the same houses. Everyone around them is dying. And
it's some immunity factor, isn't it? It's an immunity
factor, or maybe
divine intervention.
Or maybe what's the sense of killing off a whole population if you can't keep someone there to be able to tell the story of it later?
That's interesting.
You can go through and do a mass murder. Yeah, it's fine. Go in and shoot up a supermarket or high school, but keep somebody alive because you need someone to tell the story.
Right.
You need someone to tell the story, and all of a sudden, what was a simple disease is now something fantastic. We're still talking about the Black Plague today.
Right.
It's we're
probably
fascinated.
because of California, it's starting to resurface because of all the rats.
Yeah, it's fleas from the rats, right? It's the fleas that are doing it.
Yeah, it was the fleas.
People are really worried about typhus in California right now.
But I mean, but what's the one thing that man can't fight? And to be honest, it's probably what's causing climate problems at the moment, is because man has been able to fight a bunch of diseases, and we should have, there's some of the things that we should be dying out regularly to help balance out world order as far as Mother Nature's concerned. And though we keep fighting it over and over and over, Mother Nature is still trying to wipe us out. Why are things like MRSA available now? Because people are becoming too immune to things. So MRSA is born. The common cold changes, or the flu changes its strains every single year. It becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. And at the point, we're winning the war. We're able to fight these things. But there will come a time that man's not going to be able to fight this.
Right.
And there might be, if it keeps getting stronger and stronger and our immune systems are getting stronger and stronger, Mother Nature is finding a way to swipe it out. And Mother Nature has a way of doing this. If you let's take rabbits. Take rabbits in a square mile. Now, rabbits are fine in a square mile, but then what happens when there's too many rabbits in the square mile? Mother Nature gives them disease, and most of them start dying out, and almost 2/3 die out, and it keeps 1/3 of them alive. And then it starts over again, and they're fine, and they're bouncing around in a square mile.
People don't realize, though, geographically, though, we've only not industrialized, but have what's the word I want to use? Have taken control of 5% of the planet. There is still a lot of room on this planet. A lot of people don't realize it. Just drive to the other end of it. Drive to El Paso from here. It takes 12 hours.
Yeah, but the problem basically is it's not land mass against population. What happens is population against resources.
Right.
That's the problem.
Well, the planet always has a way to she will outlive us no matter what.
Mother Nature is finding a way to balance that out. That's the reason why the flu strands get stronger and stronger. And one day we're not going to be able to fight that. One day,
that's probably what it's going to be too, is the flu.
If you look at children being born today, because things are more antibacterial and stuff like this, they are, Mother Nature has got a way of fighting this. There's more kids with asthma. There's more kids with different problems nowadays, and now, that's the way things balance out, and that's what's quite interesting about death in this movie, is that is what you said before. Death has no master, and I found, what else I found quite interesting is what death says in here, is that each man creates his own God for himself, his own heaven, his own hell. And, and that's pretty much the way that we live our lives.
Exactly.
We created our own, we created our own God, this is who we're going to pray to. And whether he's, our own heaven, our own hell, but what if there is none of that stuff beyond here? Maybe this is it.
Perhaps.
That's true.
But we don't.
But then again, that goes back to what Francesca, who has faith and who does not.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a lot of arguments this movie could probably bring up, theologically.
Well, another interesting thing is that what does almost everyone have in common is that everyone's afraid to die. Doesn't matter what your faith is or what your belief system is or what you are. Everyone
Nobody
has that.
wants to die. I don't know anybody that wants to die.
And I thought that was fantastic when Death says that to Prosperos, goes, why should you be afraid to die? Your soul has been dead for a long time, and then strikes him down.
Right.
And if you look at people who do fight death to the core, they're not people who are happy with themselves. They're people who are unhappy with themselves, and they're the ones that are fighting to stay alive. Look at Howard Hughes. He had all the money in the world.
Right.
And he was so afraid of death that he locked himself away, became such a germaphobe. And
he couldn't enjoy his life.
But to be honest, no matter how much he fought it, he still died.
Right.
Yeah, he still died. Yes, they died. Death is normal.
Yeah, it's what my grandmother says. There's only two things that keeps us all attached in this world. We're all born, and we're all gonna die. It's the stuff that you do in between that's different. And it's what you do in between.
Still kind of scary though.
I
wanted to mention this about the movies, the movie and the movies of the Poe films. It's so amazing. What was the target audience of something like Masque of the Red Death?
I think the problem with Masque of the Red Death No, I don't think it was. I think that's probably the reason why it didn't make that much money. Because I think it was for a more mature audience as far as.
I would think so, sexually speaking, for one.
But also, I think it's because there's a lot of in-depth stories going on here. You know, you got the selling of your soul that's going on here with the Julianne character. You got the Francesca character. I think it.
Julianne is selling her soul. Francesca's trying to keep her soul. Prospero has no soul.
But even the stuff that Death says, I mean, I have to say some of the best lines in this are said by Death, and they're quite profound and quite deep. And I don't know. After I watched it, I was kind of like, oh, I've seen this movie when I was a kid. It was fine. It wasn't one of my favorites when I was a kid.
What one made the most money? You mentioned the money makers. Which one made the most?
Usher, Fall of House of Usher, I think, and Pit and the Pendulum. The first one. The first Poe one.
House of Wax, I think, did pretty good. I don't think that's a Poe. Wait, is that Poe?
What one? Oh, House of Wax?
Yeah.
Well, that's unique for the 3D. But House of Usher, I wonder what the budgets were for these films. They weren't. Did they even have $1 million budget?
100,000. That's it.
Oh my God!
Well, that's a lot of money for back then. Though.
No, it wasn't actually, because if you look at other films that were remade, other films being made at that time were 900 to $1 million. Well, I mean, no, I'm talking about if you look at other like William Castle films, like Homicidal that was being made at the same time and stuff like this. They were being made for about 500,000.
Okay.
But Roger Corman's known for making cheap films. He used the same sets over and over and over. I mean, that's what he did. It's like,
these films include the actors portion of it.
It includes everything. And the only reason why the Poe films cost the most, and we're talking about 100,000 was the most that Roger Corman ever spent making a film, is because he wanted these done in color, and he had to fight to get these done in color because everything before that was black and white.
Right.
And
it was also done in CinemaScope. The first one, House of Usher, was in CinemaScope as well.
Yeah.
And they had a name actor, which was him.
Yeah,
Mark Damon, I think, was also well known, but.
Well, the money that the Poe films made was able to finance Easy Rider.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, there you go.
Corman film as well. But I mean, you got to remember Corman. I mean, what's quite interesting about Corman and looking at the Poe films, and then, at some point, in the seasons to come, we're going to do a Roger Corman festival because it's quite interesting to deal with Roger Corman because he's made the most money out of and he made the most films, but he made films for very cheap. But you have to remember who he schooled underneath Roger Corman. You wouldn't have Francis Ford Coppola without Roger Corman, Joe Dante, Steven Spielberg. They all worked under him. He taught them their craft. Jack Nicholson comes from Roger Corman Studios.
Right.
His first film was Little Shop of Horrors, the old black and white stuff like this. And Roger Corman.
Who did Silence of the Lambs? Jonathan Demme, wasn't he also under Corman?
Yes, he was. And so Roger Corman got all these people started. He taught them the art of filmmaking and how to keep your budgets down. Though Francis Ford Coppola would lose how to do that once he did Godfather 2 because he didn't know anything with. After that point, you didn't know anything about budgets.
No, Godfather 3 is where they totally effing lost me.
They lost the budgets.
How could you be so sacrilegious? I just don't even get me going on what's her face Coppola.
But what I can sit there and say about him, I mean, if you look at other films, let's take some of the other films that are coming out around this time, and that they were a lot more budget. Let's sit there and say some of the, Madam X that was out at this time, or Imitation of Life that was out by, the David, Sirk films and stuff like those that were coming out. Douglas Sirk films that are coming out around this time. These are films that were spent millions on, and they still didn't. And you don't know where this money was spent, but you look at a Roger Corman film and you can see where the money's spent. He got the most out of his budgets, and that's why I have to say I love the Poe Roger Corman films because for £100,000, I'm like, God forbid, everything's there on the screen. You know what I mean? And I think he did a fantastic job with all of them, really.
I totally agree with you.
Was it Corman's idea to make Vincent Price a Satanist in this movie, or Prospero?
It might have been Beaumont.
Beaumont, okay, yeah, it is Beaumont, okay.
Yeah, what happened was that Beaumont came on board and he did the original screenplay, and the thing was, is this is the first time that Corman was actually kind of working with Beaumont. Before the other ones before this were Richard Matheson, and with Richard Matheson we did Hell House with Richard Matheson. That's one of his, and of course we're doing the Twilight Zones. Richard Matheson wrote a lot of those.
Incredible Shrinking Man.
Yeah, but what Richard Matheson was quite good with Roger Corman was saying is that he would get the scripts for the other Poe films up until this point, and no work had to be done on them whatsoever. With Beaumont's one, all he got was the Masque of the Red Death, and they had to fill this out. So then Wright Campbell brought in Hot Frog and meandered that into the storyline to make a fuller, more fledged movie. But the Beaumont is the one who did the devil worship and the Satan worship because he wanted
Have the fear factor in it.
Not for the fear factor, but it's mainly to give Vincent Price's character, he wanted him evil from day one and keep him evil. And the best way to keep someone evil and black at heart is to make him a Satanist without going into like a whole backstory about how Prospero became this person. So once you know he's a Satanist, you know Prospero's bad, and that's all you need to know about him. You don't need to know about what made him bad. You just know he's bad because he's a Satanist.
Right. And that there's no... he can't reclaim anything. No reclamation comes from that. Once you're a Satanist until you die and go join Satan.
I mean, another thing that's quite interesting about The Masque of Red Death as a film is also that you don't have any, outside of Francesca, which you have a slight backstory. You don't have a backstory on any of these people, but you're totally engrossed in them. You're totally invested in them, which is quite bizarre.
Say, you've got to be into the characters. Sometimes you just don't care about certain characters. That makes the movie shitty for you. But if you're vested in the characters, then it holds your attention and keeps you captivated. So you really like the movie.
Well, I mean, I always liked the movie, and to be honest, I never, I just got really into the character stuff like this. Up until I read Hot Frog, I didn't know anything about the story of the two dwarfs. Now, I read the short stories before I watch the films, or I read the book before I watch the films. Now that's the way I go around about it. And now it's like when I watched it, it's like I've looked at the whole story as like a totally different thing because I read the short story beforehand. It's like, oh, okay.
Well, it does shed some light on it.
Yeah,
it is worth the read.
But if you watch the film without that background, it's like you're just like, okay, it's a midget. You don't have that back. You don't have that backstory that they've been taken out their homelands and given as gifts because this is what you do to people. Here, look what I found. I was killing all the people in this town. I found you a dwarf. Happy birthday. So that's pretty much it. So,
what do you think of the? Which is not in the short story, the stylized method that the people were infected with the Red Death. Will they do a dance of death?
Well, I think I kind of agree with Roger Corman. Roger Corman said that his biggest disappointment was that scene in this film because he only had 1 day to shoot this because of budgetary reasons, and he would have liked to have spent like 4 or 5 days doing it. And I think it's played well, but it's done more of like artistic death, which I think I probably want to see them wriggling and straining and dying something horrible. Like, you know what I mean? Right. Go through the throes of death instead of like, okay. I like when Red Death passes by them and they freeze. And then when he passes over them, they're red. I like that.
Their corpses are still supposed to be dancing. So.
Yeah, I like the artisticness of it, but I would kind of like to see them like screaming out and withering in pain. And
agony.
Yeah,
agony.
I would like a little more Walking Dead activity going on in that.
Yeah.
Well, it was all stylistic because even when they started doing this macabre dance, like New Age dance moves or whatever, they went around Prospero, didn't they? And like danced around him, and he's got this very theatrical look on his face, like, no, let me out of here.
Yeah.
That's what he kind of looks like there. And that's when the camera is everywhere Prospero goes, followed by these people. The Red Death is standing there. Do you remember that?
He goes through the rooms, and he can't escape the rooms either.
Right.
So.
And that's when he goes in, and he says, and then the weird thing that we didn't mention is that for years I thought that was Christopher Lee's voice of the Red Death. It sounds very much like him.
Mm. Whose voice is it?
Did you ever notice that?
It doesn't say, does it?
Well, I think it's said that people have questioned it.
It's John Westbrook.
It's who?
John Westbrook.
Oh, uncredited is the Red Death.
Yeah, he sounds very much like Christopher Lee. You know, but I did read that it wasn't Christopher Lee, but it does still sound like him. And this is the weird thing about the Red Death. The Red Death will spare you if you're virtuous, or if you're very old, or if you're very young, apparently, in his view. So if you're an adult and you're not, virtuous, you're dead.
Right.
What's quite interesting about John Westbrook as the voice of death is he's in the Tomb of Lygia.
Oh, he is? Okay.
Yeah. So apparently, yeah.
I don't have many memories of that film. I remember an inferno and a cat.
Makes me want to Vincent Price out for the next couple days next week.
Oh, I'm looking forward to getting more into my Vincent Price collection again. So, but yeah, I think that as far as the film goes, I think that artistically, I think their deaths do work well within the artistic framework of this. But after reading the short story and you realizing what the Red Death really is, it's basically so much pain and all your pores are bleeding, and it's so much pain that it kills you within 30 minutes after getting it. I kind of, I don't think you really get that in the film, but I think artistically, I think the film looks beautiful, and I think they've done a very good job.
I agree.
But I would like to know more about how horrible this death was though. And I think,
You know what, the one thing that stood out to me throughout the film, and I found myself just constantly gazing, was Vincent Price's makeup, how they had his face done up. I don't know why I found that so mesmerizing. I guess maybe when men do their makeup better than me, I find it, fascinating. But I just loved how they had his makeup. I liked what they did with his eyes, his cheekbones, you name it. They made him look like Prospero.
Right.
I just love the makeup.
And the facial hair had a lot to do with it. Wasn't there something, is it my imagination, or was there something about the set being revolving? Have you ever heard that? The major ballroom scene, that the floors could revolve around each other. I remember reading that before.
Well, maybe, it would make a bit of sense when you look at thinking about it, the way camera angles are made and the way that the crowd are moving and stuff like this, and the big crowd scenes. And I guess it would be kind of revolving as well as when you go to the rooms, because if you look at it, they don't make any cuts. It's a single camera panning as they're going through the different rooms.
No, they don't. And you would think with
that means
the
they must have breakaway walls then to be able to do
No,
that.
they wouldn't. And you're right. Obviously, there was a wall that was missing. It was the wall with the camera in it.
Yeah.
But you're right. Having a cinematographer like Nicholas Roeg, you're not just going to have him there for name value. I mean, he's going to contribute something important to because anybody who's a cinematographer can film that scene. He had to bring something special to it. And I did read that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Like I said, it does make sense, because if you look at the one scene where Francesca's going from room to room and you see Vincent Price, and it's all done in one long shot. And the thing is, they're walking towards the camera, but the thing is that the camera's pulling back. But you notice that they're going through doorways. So that means when the camera's going through, someone's closing the walls as they're going through them to make sure that you
That's right.
Otherwise, you wouldn't have that effect. You just have like these open gaping spaces and stuff. So
that's right. So
it's
not my favorite Poe film. I actually think that my favorite Poe film was Premature Burial. It doesn't even have Vincent Price in it, but it does have Hazel Court in it. And I really like
doing
that.
a Premature Burial later on in the year.
There you go.
Wow, that's wonderful. You know what gets me about these movies, and Hammer films too, because they did a lot of period films, is these things were sumptuously mounted. And they would show like the inside of a mansion, like House of Usher, for example, and the camera would just pan through these gigantic rooms. And I was thinking, I never saw, I was raised on AIP films where it was about an alien out in the desert controlling everybody, and they made a cow go on the rampage. I mean, that's the kind of thing that I saw in black and white. And now you see this sumptuous, well-staged production. I mean, they were really taking a big chance, but they gave Hammer a run for its money, because Hammer did things like that all the time. I started becoming fascinated fascinated by the wall bric-a-brac and how come these pictures are hung with such precision and everything is so even. And they were a cheap outfit too, and their audience were teenagers, the matinee kids, and how they were able. I mean, it shows a certain artistry at work. It's not just merely programming, getting this in and out, like Jesse James versus Dracula. Have you ever seen that? That was pretty horrible.
God, yes.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that was. I mean, as far as B movies goes, that is one of the top of the heap.
That's like D. It's not even in B category. It's like around the time of Plan 9. I remember I read so much about Plan 9 from Outer Space, and when I finally saw it, I expected this laugh riot. It was just so awful. It was just awful. Like Blood Feast, that's another one. That was just awful to watch.
Exactly.
The gore effects were good, but the acting was horrible. Laughable, actually, but they didn't do it for laughs. They did it for horror. So that wasn't present in Masque of the Red Death. No, they took it all very seriously, and I liked it. They gave good performances,
So, Vicky, what are your final thoughts of Masque of the Red Death, the film? And
I liked Vincent Price's makeup. I just love Vincent Price. I mean, yeah, he's been in some crap movies and stuff like most actors, but pretty much anything that he's in, especially if you're like us who actually follow this stuff and like to watch this stuff, it's one you have to see. And actually, I don't know how many people still out there like to read. I know there's some of us out there that still do, but read the stories. Maybe if they're really like totally quick reads, it gives you a totally different take on the movie. And like I said, that doesn't take you long to read it. But I just love it because it's the old stuff, and it doesn't have the major special effects like we got now, but it's just a really cool movie.
And what about yourself, Rod? What are your final thoughts of Masque of the Red Death?
Well, I love the film, and it's the kind of film that I will revisit every now and again. Or if it happens to be on TV, which is a strange thing, I might have a DVD in my room with all the bells and whistles on it, but I'll watch this thing on Turner Classic Movies instead. That's so strange?
Like, and you're lazy, and you don't want to get up and go get the DVD, and you're just going to chill with all the the commercials too.
Yeah, with the commercials. I mean, I DVR it so I can fast forward the commercials, but nonetheless, I will do that instead of watching the deluxe widescreen DVD I have in my bedroom. So it's always been a favorite of mine. All those Poe films, once Corman left, I didn't like them as much. Even though The Witchfinder General, which is not, they tried in America to tie that into Poe, they really couldn't. All it made me think was, did they really burn witches in America after watching that movie?
No, they didn't. They used to hang them, and they used to drown them, and they would do everything else with them.
Yeah.
But
did they burn them in England, or is that just...
Yeah, no, The Witchfinder General is actually a true story about Matthew Hopkins. That's what really happened.
They really did burn people?
Yeah. All you had to do is go, she looks like a witch, let's burn her. Because Matthew Hopkins...
Horrible!
Well, Matthew Hopkins...
New England, there was very... I don't know.
No, in New England, they just hung them. I mean, it sounds terrible. They just hung them.
But it's in England. It was in England and in Europe. There was money involved. Matthew Hopkins was making money out of doing it. So.
Well, on top of that, at the time, the United States was under British rule, so it was the British people who were doing it, because everybody over here spoke with British accents. That's what I find so interesting. I watch a movie about the Revolutionary War, and everybody will be talking like Americans in America. It stands to reason that they'd be speaking, the British way of talking.
That's sort of like ghost hunting. When you're watching a ghost hunting show, and if you're in China or another country, and the ghost answers back in English.
They can adjust.
Come on.
They can adjust. But I really do love Masque of the Red Death. It's one that I revisit many times. It's got a great musical score. I think Ronald Stein did the music.
It does.
It has a great. Is it the end sequence or the beginning where the cadaver is playing solitaire?
Oh,
it's
a cartoon. It's animated. Is that at the beginning of the film?
It's the final sequence. Yes,
all right, that's a very good sequence. It's fascinating to watch that.
I didn't remember seeing it in the beginning.
Yes, at the
I
end
don't remember what the beginning credits were. Usually they showed like swirling. It looked like paint.
It's just like, well, actually, it started off as like that really the dark scene with the grandmotherly figure.
Yeah. You just get the red screen that says Masque of the Red Death.
Yeah.
Edgar Allan Poe, and then it cuts into the scene, so you don't even get like Vincent Price starring or anything like that.
Oh, at the end you did though, I think.
Yeah, you get all that at the end. So, and as far as me, I think Masque of the Red Death is a brilliant film. I think it was a brilliant short story. Hob Frog was another excellent story that I'm glad I turned on to. And Masque of the Red Death, I'm a huge Vincent Price fan.
I don't know how you can't be. I love him.
I collect all his films, down from like simple films like The Bat and things like that.
Yeah, The Bat. I saw that in the movies too.
And I collect everything. I try, every time there's a Blu-ray with Vincent Price, I do collect it because I just can watch them over and over. But Masque of the Red Death, I love the artistry of it. I love the beauty of it. I love the way it looks. Is it my favorite? No, my favorite has to be Tomb of Lygia, but we'll get to that later on. But I love Masque of Red Death. I think it's an excellent film.
I enjoyed it. Like I said, I would read the stories. Especially if you're like me, Keith. Especially Keith. He's much older than me. But reading a story, what a concept, people. Come on, campers. Remember reading?
So that brings us to the end of the Literary License Podcast, Season 3, month of It Might Be Catching. So you can always find us on our social media, which is available on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, and Instagram. And you can also follow us on our webpage, which is www.llpodcast.com. And you can also find us on our new forum that will be up and running on our podcast. And make sure you subscribe to our newsletter, which comes out once a month. And I want to thank all our 250 subscribers to our newsletter.
From? I don't know.
We want to thank you a lot. And we also want to thank everyone that's actually been joining up with our various platforms. As you know, you can find us on YouTube and iHeartRadio, Cashbox, SoundCloud, Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, and all the other ones. And thank you so much for all the brand new followers. I want to welcome all the 82 new followers that we have on our podcast formats. And thank you for all the comments that you're making and some of your emails. And as you know, if you do email us, you can email us at info@llpodcast.com, and we'll make sure we return your reply within 24 hours.
If you have any complaints, it's Keith Shago at llpodcast.com.
Next month, we'll be covering the AIDS film called Longtime Companion, part of our It Might Be Catching month, and it comes at night about a family who's hiding out from a disease that's killing off the world.
It's a messed up story. I watched that last night.
So remember, if you're at home and you're sneezing or just feel your eyes itching a little bit, you could be coming down with the Red Death. So please go see a doctor as soon as possible.
Oh, great.
Or the purple death, or the red death, or the yellow death, or the gold death, or the indigo.
So we want to thank our special guest co-host, Rod Laby. Thank you so much, Rod, for joining us.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
And we'll be saying goodnight to our listeners, and we'll be back next week with Longtime Companion, and It Comes at Night. Say goodnight, Vicky.
Good night, everybody.
Say goodnight, Rod.
Good night. Good night, everybody.
And good night for myself, and we'll talk to you next week.
Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements and corpse-like mask which they handled with so violent a rudeness, untenanted by any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay, and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all.
We don't admit it, but we've never seen eye to eye. My hobby's moaning and yours is making money. It's always a shock when old friends pass by, but with you it's no death in the family. Let's not talk about hate when there's hell to pay for my cowardice and your bad timing. We don't admit it, but we've never seen eye to eye, and it's not through a lack of trying. It was the perfect disease we had. Something to argue and scream about. Who do I see about contracting it back and locking it somewhere it can't get rid of? It was the perfect disease we had, and its absence lies a painful fact. We all need someone to drive us mad. I didn't say it, but you never were the honest type. You tried to fabricate a bedtime story, and now I miss those games we had of Jekyll and Hyde. Ever since the day that we parted company, don't send a helping hand. I need a battering ram to beat the reasons that I miss you so sorely. I didn't say it, but we never saw eye to eye. Now life is deadly and equally as boring. It was the perfect disease we had. Something to argue and scream about. Who do I see about contracting it back and locking it somewhere it can't get rid of? It was the perfect disease we had, and in its absence lies a painful fact. We all need someone to drive us mad. I need you in the TV, I need you on the train. I need you every single which way. I need you in the mirrors, I need you in my bed. I need you to wreck my head. I need you in the TV, I need you on the train. I need you just to stand in my way. I need you in the mirrors, I need you in my bed. It was the perfect disease we had. Something to argue and scream about. Who do I see about contracting it back and locking it somewhere it can't get rid of? It was the perfect disease we had, and in its absence lies a painful fact. We all need someone to drive us mad.